Greetings and welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Johnathan Pritchett, and along with me, as usual, is
Braxton Hunter.
And it's becoming pretty much usual for Tim Barber to be here 3 weeks in a row.
Yeah, 3 weeks featured, 2 weeks live now.
So that's right. Well, glad to have you. Unfortunately, Leighton Flowers found anything else to do other than join us once again, but I have it on good authority to announce that joining us soon will be the TMU version of Leighton Flowers. Nick Quint, the New Testament theologist, said he wanted to jump in and talk. But anyway, we're going to try.
It's like saying Dr. Pepper is the TMU version of Coca-Cola. It's like those are two different things.
Well, I just had to take a shot at Nick for whatever reason, but maybe he'll be replacing Braxton. He ducked out for a minute, but anyway, today we are going to try to get as far as we can, but this is, I promise, the last time we're going to do this. But we wanted to get to Tim responding. We wanted to get you to respond to your own stuff. So I thought that would be interesting. Your rebuttal, and then maybe some of the cross-examination. Somebody asks, but where's Idol Killer?
We have to go over this again.
I think
he's in the doghouse. I mean, because he sticks his nose up at Trinity Radio's link every week. So, that's on Warren. If he wants to hang out and as a bottom feeder on YouTube and diss the big leagues, that's his business.
Let's jump into it, Johnathan.
Let's jump into it. Let's hear from Tim watching himself and see what he has to say for himself. And if he's happy with it, not happy with it, if you'd like to have said more, what you wish you should have said, things like that.
I'd be happy with it.
Yeah. In 1 Corinthians 2, Paul says that if the rulers of this age, catch this now, these are God's enemies who hate God, who hate his plans, who hate his creation, and want to take all of everything good God has ever made back into chaos and death and destruction. If they had known God's wisdom, then they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. They were the ones God blames for the death of Jesus, and he can redeem even that.
Now, I like this verse because it's useful for more than just open theists, because a lot of people talk about, well, had they had this information, that thing would not have occurred. The cross would not have occurred. And so, that's a puzzling statement for anyone who I think affirms that there was no other way, except the normal pushback is, well, that's just a hypothetical, or it would have been the case if, but that doesn't mean that it was ever going to be the case, so it doesn't really matter. But it is an alternative possibility that was never going to happen for Molinists, for simple foreknowledge, for Calvinists, etc. Now, for open theists, that's a live option. So I think that's where the difference is that we could say it wasn't like decreed or whatever, but we could say that it was logically possible that could happen. There was a possible world in which that could have happened had they had that knowledge, but it wasn't going to happen. You're like, yeah, I mean,
correct. So the distinction here is that you guys, Molinists, simple foreknowledge folks, I want to call them Arminians, but that's just such a fraught term. And then Calvinist, determinist / fatalist / decretalists.
But not
the kind of approach there is that those are all like what we would call they're possibilities. Okay.
Yeah.
Not in a Calvinist sense. I think they're explicitly not possibilities in a Calvinist sense, but they are possibilities in a Molinist or a simple foreknowledge frame that just have a 0% live chance of ever coming to pass. They are possibilities that were, proscripted not to happen from before time.
Debatable on the simple foreknowledge view, I think.
Yeah. My view is that they are open possibilities that God actively navigated away from in time as they became like, as the likelihood of that kind of an event became more and more possible, he actively took action to navigate away from it.
So God had
but wait a minute. If it was a simple foreknowledge view, right? And God knows what's going to happen because on simple foreknowledge, he knows the future exhaustively in that way, but he doesn't have middle knowledge on the simple foreknowledge view. And if you're saying that, if Pritchett, you're saying that regardless of whether they had libertarian freedom, since God knows it will go one way, that's the way it will go. And if you want to say on the simple foreknowledge view, no, because it could branch off this way or that way, God just knows which one it will do. Well, now you're just a Molinist because you're saying God has all of the different options available.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Well, yeah. Because
Simple foreknowledge is such a modest claim that it doesn't really try to handle all those edge cases. It's basically just kind of throwing up the hands and saying, well, I mean, I guess God just can know.
It's
future.
all will be's. It's not could have beens. Right. It's just God knows all will be's. And so, I mean, you could just say, well, sure. I mean, it's a simple foreknowledge person could just say, well, sure. It's in a manner of speaking, it's just theoretical speculation. But my question then becomes, as with all things, yeah, but is it true?
Right.
How would we know that was true? Is it true? I mean, if they want to say, well, it's just common sense. If they knew that it was if they knew the future, they wouldn't have done it. It's common sense. They didn't want to wreck their own empire. Well, fair enough. But they would have to know, I don't know. I see what possible answers they could respond.
Well, I didn't mean for us to get stuck on that, but since someone else is pushing back too, it says God does have middle knowledge in simple foreknowledge. He just doesn't use it to tweak people's choices. Hold on a second. If that's what you're saying, then you're a Molinist. If that's what you think, you just think that God has middle knowledge and doesn't use it. But here's the thing. I don't find that plausible at all, because it means that God was aware of worlds he could actualize that would be more salvific or even exactly the same as this world, but maybe 10 more people become Christians or something. And he just doesn't care. He just doesn't actualize that world when he could have. He just thinks, no, I'm just going to let this one go. I just don't find that compelling if you think he has middle knowledge.
Well, for me, I think you could push back and say he doesn't need middle knowledge to know that's what would have happened. It could just be a common sense thing.
What do we mean by a common sense thing?
Well,
like, we could say it's common sense that the best possible being wears a
common sense to say, had my son known that there were actually cookies in the cookie jar, he would have reached out and grabbed them had he had known. Now it's behind the cabinet, and last time he checked, it was empty. But had he known that I had put cookies back in the jar, had he known, he would have ate them. I mean, that's just common sense. You could say something like that, because one of the things that I warn against Calvinists and Molinists and open theists and simple foreknowledge, whatever your view is, one thing I warn is don't always try to read some sort of metaphysics into every single statement of the Bible. And so there's a way that you can read that. So, yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, it's just to say, had they known that the entire world was going to get turned upside down, which was the accusation against the apostles, they wouldn't have done it. So, I mean, I'm just saying there are ways that you could answer it. And it seems like, yeah, they probably wouldn't want their world turned upside down, which is what
I'm 50-50 on that, Pritchett. Because if you want to get pedantic about it and get specific, even though you just said we don't have to, and get metaphysical about it, the truth about it is if let's see, what was the last thing you just said? Oh, because you're basically saying, well, it's common sense that if such and such people, let's say, had repented or had seen this, they would have repented or whatever.
Had they known what was going to happen, they would not.
Yeah. What I'm saying is you have God guessing there on some level. And I think this is a charge that Tim might help you with, because I think some stuff on his view could reduce a little bit to, or maybe not him, maybe more it's Chris Fisher type thing. But this idea that God doesn't know for sure, but he speaks certainly about things that he doesn't know for sure. And then you have God possibly being a false prophet or just being wrong.
Okay, so I can't say I know for absolute certainty that had my son known there were cookies in the cookie jar, he definitely would have.
Right, because you're not God.
But now we're doing metaphysics again. But
Tim, no, I said I wanted to do some metaphysics, even though you just said.
But Tim could say, for Tim, it's fine. It's like, I mean, yeah, it's okay to just that's a more safe assumption than not that God's
that God doesn't know.
That God's correct here.
And could be
because
wrong.
he can know their hearts. He can know their hearts in the present and know
really
well. Had they had,
I think we should take a second to acknowledge Nick's presence, because good to see you.
He's always around.
Nice to meet you.
He's always around.
I'm supremely boring, so please continue.
No.
it seems to me that God's knowledge of those people in the present, he knows that, okay, Nick Quinn is now having us do Olivia Newton-John riffs. Okay. You could
Only
just
you would notice that. Oh my
Let's
God.
get
80s, man.
what is
It,
this, bro?
I know it's in one of my 80s playlists. It has.
I
to
always
be.
You're
just
just
think
trying
of
to
Let's Get
obfuscate
Ethical
away
from
from
The
the
Office.
fact that
No, I'm just saying God can know their state in the present and know.
he could know.
Yes, God knows their hearts. Open
Knows.
theists believe that too.
He knows their hearts as they are now. He can know based on their hearts what
Based
they're
on
going to
their
do.
hearts, God can know that had they had this information, he knows their hearts enough to say, yeah,
This
they
is the
wouldn't have
fun
done
part.
that.
Okay, so in my view, God can know some things that are certainties. There are things that God knows as certainties based on the current state and the past behavior of a person, right? The best predictor of future behavior is actually past behavior. So even we do this, even we with our limited ability think in this way, where we are like wary of trusting a person who has demonstrated being untrustworthy in the past, right? So God, being infinitely more understanding and infinitely more intelligent than us, being able to observe the present state of a person's heart, can actually know with something resembling 100% certainty certain things that will happen in the future.
Okay. Well, go on. You flesh out whatever else you want to say.
The other side of that is that if there's some trepidation, if there is some conditionality in the heart, or if there's some play in the joints where, you know, it's like it could go this way or it could go that way, those would be the things that I would say God doesn't, like, metaphysically 100% know, right? And this is the funny part, is that I've gotten a lot of flack in my experience post debate for saying that all three of the other views, right, the Calvinist view, the Molinist view, the simple foreknowledge view, roughly see the future as a settled line of what will happen, right? They get to that from different angles. The Calvinist thinks it is that way because God decreed it to be that way. The Arminian thinks that the simple foreknowledge person thinks that it is that way simply because God can look at and know the future choices of free-willed creatures, and that's all there is to it. It doesn't say anything. It's kind of weird to talk about how he would interact with that if that's the case, but that's neither here nor there. And then the Molinist looks at it as, well, God had an infinite array of possible choices for possible worlds to actualize. He chose the one that best fit the goals he has for his creation, whether that's his own self-glorification or whatever it is. And then he instantiated that world based on what he knew would happen given every single combination of if-then statements, right? Subjunctive counterfactuals and all that. But it's still a settled line. So all of them have trouble with, like, the passages in the Bible that do seem to say do seem to depict God as being frustrated, do seem to depict God as being surprised, or as having worked for something and really put in a lot of effort in terms of, like, setting up Israel to be his covenant partners. And he says he plants a vineyard and he put a wall around it and he set a watchtower and all these things, and they still rebelled. It's just some play there.
My point here is, I don't think even the Calvinist has a hard time with this passage. I didn't think that this was one of your stronger passages personally to demonstrate a non-settled future for whoever Calvinist Mullen. I just think there's other ways of talking about this text without trying to vomit all the metaphysics into it as if it's a bucket for our metaphysics. I didn't think that this was your strongest verse, because I would think of ways that I could handle it, but I could probably think of ways that simple foreknowledge Calvinist or Molinist or whoever can. I don't even know what Nick is. Nick, what is your position on providence?
Well, only God knows, and he doesn't know. So I'm undecided. I think this is going to sound weird. I picked up that 4 Views book on foreknowledge back in undergrad, read it, and said, yeah, the New Testament authors don't think like any of this. And I just kind of threw it away and didn't really go there. I guess I'm most sympathetic to kind of a blend of, I don't know. It's one of those, unfortunate with these views, as I understand them. And again, I'm not a systematic theologian. I'm a New Testament guy. Is the more I see them talked about, it's like you kind of have to pick one, and you might be able to nuance within it, but these 4 views don't play well with each other. They don't really blend or harmonize very well. So you're kind of, from the outside looking in, so to speak, you're kind of forced to go with one and go with it. You can tweak it from inside, but you can't get rid of the car once you basically paid for it.
And what's not talked about is your understanding of God's relationship to time, to how you can hash these things out as well, because that becomes very important. Because I think in every instance but simple foreknowledge, in every view, Molinist, Calvinist, whatever, whatever. Simple foreknowledge is the only one that does not require any bit of divine contingency prior to creation, if you want to use that language on, no time, logically prior to the temporal universe, outside of time, in and of himself, time has not yet been created. However you want to say that language. Simple foreknowledge is the only one that does not require divine contingency, because even on Calvinism, you need divine. God is open insofar as if you're going to do the free knowledge versus the natural knowledge versus free knowledge distinction with the decree sandwich there, whether you put middle knowledge there or not. In God's natural knowledge, there has to be some contingency, or God had no choice in what cosmos he was going to create, because he always knew that the one creation was going to be created. And he couldn't have done otherwise because he already knew. So you have to have, even in Calvinism, if you're going to say God chose this world as opposed to it being any different in his natural knowledge, this is why Churton pushes back against the Molinists, saying that everything that you want from middle knowledge, God already had in his natural knowledge. But if that's the case, then there has to be divine contingency in eternity's past, or whatever language you're going to use, or God was not free to create anything because he was, as you pointed out in debate and some of your rhetoric, kind of enslaved to his own knowledge of the future, or what world would come to be. So every position besides simple foreknowledge, and this is why Dave Hunt got called out by William Lane Craig for being a fatalist, is every view but that one requires contingency somewhere, sans creation. So
how does this relate to Tim's comments?
We're all open theists. Just where do you draw the line? Except for simple foreknowledge. God is open at some point. Contingency,
logically open.
You heard it here, folks. You heard it here first.
Open. I know logically.
If you don't want to make that distinction, but here's the thing.
I'm not.
Warren talks about this a lot. Warren talks about
if you don't want to make that distinction, Pritchett, then it would mean that you don't understand the distinction. But I know you understand the distinction.
I do understand.
So then quit acting like logical priority means temporal priority.
Right, but that, like I said, that begs the question on time, and I don't have a.
No, it doesn't. It's just saying we're not talking about time.
I don't know what I think about any of this.
You've already built in an assumption that time does not. Right, Tim? You've already that whole.
I'm just saying it doesn't. I'm just saying we're not talking about time. Forget time. Why are you bringing time into this? I'm saying logically,
because if
there was a
presentism
moment.
is true, then time is not even a thing to talk about other than the present.
Well, it's just that time is a different topic from what you don't have to include time in the discussion of the logical ordering of God's knowledge. The temporal thing is something that you bring in or not, and it may affect the outcome. But when we say there was a logical openness, that doesn't mean. Hold on, that doesn't mean
a timeless state prior to creation of time.
Whoa!
And there was a logical moment or a logical.
Just want you to know, this is what gets you the comments, Pritchett.
No.
This is what gets you all the comments.
I'm saying what you want me
saying
to say.
that you won't shut up.
Shut up, Braxton.
Oh, that's really going to get you some comments.
Sans creation, there was a logical point prior to time's existence where God had contingency. That's what you're looking for.
I appreciate it.
That's what you're looking for. And I think, we could say that, but that also smuggles in presuppositions about that whole conversation that I'm not sold on, which is why I'm cautioning you. But yes, logically prior to creation and the temporal bringing about of time itself, there was a logical point or moment in God's mind that had contingency on every view but simple foreknowledge.
Right. It just doesn't mean what you think it means.
No, it does mean what I know it means. What I'm saying is I think that to talk like that is already smuggling in.
What does that mean?
Huh?
Why?
To talk like what? Yeah.
To talk about logical moments and logical sequence in God's mind sans the creation of time assumes that time is a thing. And
right. Yes.
No.
That I agree with. I think it's
right.
I feel like
Braxton. Now tell Braxton why he's wrong. Tired of me talking.
I would say that it assumes the creation is the beginning point of time. And I don't hold that view. I think that time is simply a property of something, not a created thing in and of itself. Yeah. And what we call time is more measurement of time. That's different from sequence. When I think logical order and logical priority and logical things like that, that's all well and good, but if we're talking about before and after relations, I consider that sequential. And sequence is just time. So again, we talked about this a little bit last week, where if the Trinity is an eternally existing community of love between the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, if there was ever a moment in which the Father expressed something to the Son and then the Son expressed something reciprocal back, I consider that a temporal relationship. That's a temporal conversation between those three different members of the Trinity. And the creation of time is simply when we start to measure that relationship in relationship to the creation itself. Everything has temporal properties as long as it has sequence. That's the way that I view it, and I know that that's different from some folks too. I would see the issue here is that I think I need to see a case made for why we need to import other metaphysics of time before we even start having the discussion.
Yeah, well,
see,
okay, now let me try to say something here, and really do let me get it out, Pritchett. Here's the thing: is my claim was different than what you repeated back to me. My claim is that you don't have to bring in temporal stuff to talk about logical ordering. When you repeated it back, you said to say that prior to the creation of the physical universe, God logically this or that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying you can have a discussion about logical ordering of knowledge that doesn't depend on temporality. That's the whole point. And so all I'm saying is, if you think that time began, then yes, of course, we put that logical ordering prior to creation. But I don't think they have to be the same thing. I think that's conflating categories.
I don't, because what else will we be needing that distinction if it if it wasn't turned into the right? So Tim's trying
to understand God's knowledge.
Well, like I said, I mean, it could be right, but I'm just to have that conversation smuggles in presuppositions about time itself, which at this point, the more I get into theories of time, the less convinced I am that any of them are true. So I'm like, because and the reason why I brought that whole thing up, Braxton, is because Tim touched on that in the debate, because he was like, wait a minute, all of this stuff also presupposes things, but y'all didn't get too far into it. So,
all right, well, I'll back off. Sorry for pushing on that.
No, that's what people tune in for, except for Michael, except for Michael Smith. But no, that is what I was saying. I understand that language, but for me, my point originally was everyone but simple foreknowledge views has to be open at some point in God's natural knowledge, has to have some sort of contingency, or otherwise there was no way that God could do any different than what God did. And some people would bite the bullet and say that's fine because they don't believe even God has libertarian free will. But I don't think most Calvinists go there. And so most Calvinists have to find some sort of point, if we're going to talk like that, of divine contingency, so that God can choose which world instead of being a slave to his own attribute of already eternally knowing and having it settled that even he couldn't do different than he did. You know what I'm saying? In eternity past. So, but simple foreknowledge, and this is why Craig called them fatalists, is because they can't get out of that. Because God has always known that it was going to be this one world and it was always going to happen this one way, and God couldn't do anything about it either. Whereas Calvinists say that God maximizes his glory in the creation of the universe, and so in his natural knowledge, he built this up the way he. This
is one of the biggest issues for me when I look at the other three views that I don't hold, and I'm just gonna press it. There's full send. I don't have anything to there's no reason not to say this, I guess. But when I look at these three other views, in Calvinism, God decreed the world to be in the exact state in which we find it. In simple foreknowledge, God simply knows. Whether you have an interventionist simple foreknowledge or a non-interventionist simple foreknowledge, where God can, if he can't step in, I have serious problems with that. If he can step in, knows everything that will happen and knows exactly at which points he will step in. Okay, that's another view. The future is what it is.
But
and then
God,
Molinism.
But even there,
I'll finish this thought first, and then we'll come around to it.
Yeah.
Then Molinism, again, this is the best of all possible worlds, and I look around at things, and if the goal is to see like God's maximum glory come to him, right, on a Calvinist or a Molinist frame, that this world was chosen, it was optimized in a Molinist sense. What world he was optimizing for was the one where he would get the most glory and the most people would become saved. I'm like, I just look around at the state of the world, and I really wonder if we want to say that this is the best that God could do. Those are my questions. But
well, I mean, all right. Well, two things. In the simple foreknowledge, the intervisionist God has always known at what point he was going to intervene anyway. So he couldn't change when he wanted to intervene because he just simply knows that he was going to intervene when he intervenes. The Molinists, when they say best, they're not saying like
I can handle it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll shut up now.
So the Molinist picture, a while ago when you were laying out Molinism, Tim, you said that there's this infinite scope of possibilities out there, and maybe there are Molinists that hold that. I don't hold that. I hold that there is a seemingly infinite number of possible worlds, but then beyond that, or within that, there are those worlds where man has free creature, or where man is free, has libertarian freedom. And that's the kind of world among those possible worlds that God wants to create. So we cull away all the deterministic worlds or the worlds without humans or whatever else. And you're left with these worlds. And there's still probably a seemingly infinite number, though not an actually infinite number. And of those worlds where man has free will, I'm the sort of Molinist that says there is no world where you give man free will, where God actually gives man free will, where they freely end up all doing the right thing all the time. And so if God's, like you say, we don't really know for sure how to quantify God's goals here, but like, let's say that his ultimate goal is salvific, to have the most freely saved people, or
that's kind of the William Lane Craig way of framing it up.
I mean, that seems like one of the most obvious ones, especially to us evangelicals. But let's say it was his glory, whatever. That we're not saying that this is that this world is exactly the way he wants it. Yeah. We're saying it's not like he wants it. It's just the one that comes closest to of his available options.
Yeah, I think they don't mean best as in goodest, or in alignment with everything.
Most optimized for his goals. Right.
Of the available choices. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what they mean by best. They don't mean like the good.
Pritchett, do you mean most optimized for his goals without determinism?
Yes.
Is that kind of the implication?
Well, okay. His goals apparently are excluding determinism, right?
Well,
he apparently found it much more. He apparently found it much more valuable to have free will and freely received reciprocal love relationships with his creation than to determine everyone to love and worship him, which is why I think determinism is incoherent of any form, because if God is all powerful and all good and he determined everything, why determine that this world would be so full of people who hate and want to rebel against him? I find that that's another thing that I just find completely incoherent about.
Well, see, Tim, that's where I should have started with this. You said, well, Calvinism and Molinism. Well, I've given you my response to Molinism, and maybe I'm wrong, but on Calvinism, I absolutely resonate with what you're saying, because I see that everyone is doing ultimately what God in one of his wanters wanted to be done. And so God could have, if we're calling compatibilism a satisfactory understanding of freedom, then God could have, to quote Jerry Walls, set it up so that everyone freely always does what is most pleasing to him, like according to what we know, what he tells us would be pleasing to him. Yeah.
So,
well, we're half an hour into this thing and we've done one clip. I don't know if we're trying to.
I'll talk less because honestly, Pritchett, I was going to say this. You forget that guy who says that you are bad for the channel or whatever. You're my man. You're my bro. You're my Samwise.
I think it's funny. I'm happy with it.
So, but that said, I'm going to speak less because last time I did mix it up a lot with Tim about time and Molinism, and it was so fun. And by the way, if I came off too gruff here this morning, I'm just having fun with it. No, I'll talk less. And Pritchett, I want you to feel like you and Nick talk as much as you want.
I'm just glad that finally it's been about 6 months since you told me on a live stream to shut up that I got to say it. Because I've been waiting for y'all go back about 6 months from now when Braxton told me, shut up, Pritchett. So I got to finally say it back. Just excited. I love this channel. All right. But back to that comment from the clip that we 30 minutes later. What is your what were you with this verse? What were you trying to prove? because you're trying to prove a point with this verse. What do you think this verse proves?
This is the 1 Corinthians 2, 7 and 8
Yes.
verse, right? So what I think that it proves there is that, and this is really levied mostly at Dr. White's version of why the future is settled, right? It's aimed at that because what Paul does not appeal to, conspicuous by its absence in Paul's statement, is anything that refers to God decreeing or determining the things that happen. What he appeals to is their lack of knowledge, right? He appeals to their, if they had possessed that knowledge, then they would have, you could assume the word freely in there, they would have chosen otherwise if they possessed more knowledge. It wasn't God made them do this thing. Now there's that Acts 4 verse that needs some careful treatment about whatever God's hand foreordained for them to do. But when I'm looking at that verse, it's just pointing out, and it was also in the context of a discussion on evil, the activities of evil and sort of the warfare worldview versus the blueprint worldview. So I sort of couched that in the discussion as saying, look, the acts of evil, which God we know used for good. It was his wisdom from before time. You know, he says that in the verse prior, in verse 7. But in verse 8, the thing that he appeals to for why it happened was that they lacked more knowledge. They lacked more information.
Yeah, I think the Calvinists could answer it. I just don't think that. I think that any answer that you get from this decretalist perspective could be ripped to shreds pretty easy. Not saying that my responses that I gave, the possibilities I gave, you couldn't push back, but you know,
and it's part of a cumulative case too.
I would push back on you if you tried to push back on my rebuttal to that. It's like, well, I mean, in a manner of speaking, God knows, even, you know, on any of the views, at least how they would feel now. So just to make that statement, there's nothing inherent, I think, in that statement that implies that it would be untrue if determinism were true. Because you would have to make the claim that you could not affirm this verse as a determinist. And I think a determinist might be able to wiggle out of it. And I gave some possibilities, but you could probably push back on it. You would have to ask, how is that true and how is that false? In what way? But that would get into a lot of metaphysics. So let's go to I just didn't think it was the strongest verse that you could appeal to. I mean, because you could tie them up and down just with the Abraham thing, right?
Well,
I mean,
Pritchett,
look how long we all went on that last week.
Pritchett, you could have. I mean, I don't remember this part from the debate, Tim. Sorry, so if I'm speaking from ignorance.
Still just weird that people are talking about a debate I did a couple of weeks ago. I'm still just kind of coming around to this.
Yeah, you're a cause celeb in the apologetics world because you made Dr. White look like, interesting. You could have. I mean, did
be nice.
I was. Did you see what I had to swallow? Just you be nice. You're the one who told Braxton Daddy to shut up. You mean?
Now I'm telling you to shut up.
You shut up.
You be nice to Nick.
Seminary president. People that grade dissertations.
Yeah, one day maybe. I was curious just with the language of, the rulers of this age, and that's an interesting phrase, obviously, but I take that as probably an amalgamation of both natural and supernatural entities or structures, rulers, all that sort of stuff. I find it interesting the emphasis is on this age. It's one of those where that's not quite a statement of time, although it kind of is, and at least in Paul's own way.
More like era.
Yeah, or realm sort of thing. More like dominion, or it's political language. But I was curious if, had you brought up to Dr. White, you have these rulers who are doing these things, who are doomed to pass away, and all these sorts of realities. You have these kind of rogue elements of the cosmos doing things that you can say are being finger puppeted by God to do these things, ultimately, for doing that sort of language, But did that come up in the debate at all on that, or kind of the rogue elements, like even Satan or any of these figures, if you remember?
I think that is so. It didn't come up, certainly, in the way that we're talking about now. And I think that is a sticking point for people in kind of like the Calvinist realm. Sorry to borrow the term again.
Yeah, Dr. White says that he uses Satan and actually appeals to, where he, what is it, 1 Corinthians, the God of this age, specifically? Where is that?
2 Corinthians, yeah.
Yeah. So he says that God that could very well mean Satan, but that God is using Satan instrumentally is his language for that. So just to clarify,
Yeah,
that's
this was the reason behind my phrase in the debate, that this view makes God the devil behind the devil. He's the one for whom all of the ideas that he would cause the devil to bring about originated in his mind, and he's using the devil simply as a means of expressing his evil in the creation. That's what this.
Just go with
that's
the
what this
author
does.
analogy. It makes the devil redundant, which is bad writing.
Okay, I'm sure.
Actually, it's funny you say that. What do you mean, Nick?
I mean, why do you need a devil if you're the one ultimately doing all this? And it goes back to what you guys were talking about with determinism and all that sort of stuff. It's like it seems like why even do all this? Because you're already maximally glorified. Unless we want to say that
he's a character. Could a person holding the author analogy not say, not that they don't think these are actual figures, but using the analogy of the author analogy, that they just say that, well, Satan was a character in the story that God wanted in the story because he's an amalgamation of evil or something.
And the issue is that God himself is also a character in the story. I don't think that this is ever brought up in the author analogy thing.
Yeah,
you have two gods. There's the author that's like the supervening,
but
it doesn't make any sense to me.
There is a utility in Satan for the behalf of the elect to function in a way that you can see what God has rescued you from, even if he's authoring the entire story. The utility of it, I think, is their argument that it teaches you something about evil and what you're being delivered from and all of that. So there's a goal.
Thank God Christians aren't utilitarian ethicists, because that's monstrous.
All right, let's go to the next one.
In advance of this debate, that my opponent will bring up Isaiah 40 through 48 in his case against my view, and bearing the image of my maker, I've prepared a response in advance. James said that Isaiah 40 through 48 gives us the mechanism whereby we are to determine a true God from a false God. James's view makes a mockery of these passages. The entire thrust of the narrative is that God is trying to convince foolish, immoral, and obstinate humans to return to him and trust him because he is their maker and the one true God. If James believes that God decreed from eternity past for all of these people to reject him, then this God is a manipulative monster. He's demanding that they do what he's ensuring they can't, and they won't. In Isaiah 48, 3 through 5, smack in the middle of this passage, he thinks is a death knell for my view. God says, because I knew that you were obstinate, and your neck was an iron sinew, and your brow bronze, even from the beginning I have declared it to you, before it came to pass, I proclaimed it to you, lest you should say, my idol has done them, and my carved image and my molded image have commanded them. Thus, in the context, God isn't saying what James White and the other settled futurists want him to say. The span of chapters isn't about God knowing the end of all things from the beginning of all things. He declares the end of a matter in which he's involved from the beginning of the matter, on a time horizon short enough for human beings to see the result of God's work and become convinced to follow him when previously they refused. The point is that God has power, and the mute idol statues God's people have hoarded themselves after do not. There is no passage in this stream of chapters which demands Dr. White's view that God unilaterally decreed all that would come to pass. What this passage does show is that God has the power to declare plans and bring them about, that his enemies do not, and that therefore Israel should trust in Yahweh instead. He's making a case to convince them, and yet, sadly, they still reject their Lord.
So this is where you get into a little bit of whining about having a prepared remark, which I think is what does that do? I did not understand that criticism about studying your. I would think that it was to show it would be respectful, that because I paid attention to everything that my opponent says, I anticipated this, and so to communicate, I think that's a sign of respect that you paid attention to what would come up and then had something prepared so that you could be succinct with it, and then that way you're not wasting time on it.
Now let me play even-handedly with Dr. White here. Let me try to play even-handedly. I think that the real point at which he thought that was the biggest problem was when it came to the anthropomorphism and metaphor thing. And because he did not use those terms, he didn't think that it was appropriate for me to raise the objection that was representative of his view. So because he did not use those phrases, and I mentioned them, and he just kind of, there's a point in the video debate where he just kind of like leans over and you can see he's trying to read what's on my computer screen. He just assumed that I had a pre-written thing written out that I was just like not even going to interact with him, and it was just a presentation interrupted by the other guy. This wasn't really that. Obviously he knew that I knew he was going to do this. And then he did this, and this was a direct response. That's the one where he really thinks I didn't respond, or that I just came up with something random to complain about that Calvinists usually say, but that he didn't say during the course of the debate. My contention is that, of course, he did. His view necessarily reduces those things to anthropomorphism, or as we said last week, anthropopathism and metaphor. But that wasn't really the issue here. He whined about it later, but for someone who
I didn't
believes
think
in a decree, he sure complains a lot.
I think that you did it for one specific thing there doesn't mean that everything you said in your rebuttal period was pre-written. Just that response you went straight to because you had a go-to response. Most debaters do that if they anticipate something. It's just preparation.
I didn't get that criticism at all. I just thought it illustrates what he's saying God is able to do. That's what it does. Like I can know enough about you to know that you're going to say these things, even though I don't have exhaustive knowledge of the future.
But he doesn't believe that God is able to do that. He actually doesn't believe that God is able to sort of change the plan midstream or make what he believes is that God determined from before the foundation of the world for me to know exactly what Dr. White would say and have exact responses prepared. That the whole thing was decreed to happen exactly the way that it happened. And for me to know, God, through, I don't know, maybe divine gnosis, gave me what I needed to know in order to defeat him in a debate.
Yeah. So your argument here is essentially that what God is just stating that he can know the past exhaustively. So that's fine. That's why he can explain why those things occurred. And that would include whatever he did interactively to make the situation come out the way that he wanted. And your point is that what he declared the end for, I guess, the often quoted the end from the beginning. Well, that doesn't mean every instance whatsoever.
Right. The end of what from the beginning of what. And in the context, I would say of certainly of Isaiah 40 through 48, what is being discussed there is the end of a matter from the beginning of a matter on a time horizon short enough for the people to whom he's appealing to be able to see the results of God's actions in order to convince them.
Yeah, and then, but the subsequent audiences would be able to see that, and I think that they could reasonably infer from that that's going to happen on every matter that God. And so I think that there's at least some. I think that your reading is probably correct on that. But Dr. White's pushback on this was no. Isaiah also discusses creation. And I think
saying one thing in one sentence and then another thing in another sentence does not necessitate that they're related.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's 9 chapters that are actually 40 through 49 bit off 10 chapters. That somewhere in there I can tie this all up, but that's not really how you do exegesis. So I think that that's not a good strategy because you can both go through those 9 chapters and find what you want to, I hate to use this word, but spin it in your direction, right?
Yeah, in a shorter span of chapters, I could frame Jesus's conversation with his disciples during the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, and then the Great Commission as part of the same conversation. That it does not matter. It's the context of the statements being made when they're being made. We can't just like jury rig and rip things bleeding out of the context and just duct tape it all together. Yeah,
and I mean when we talk about God's knowledge, God knows how to. As far as to have someone names a child Cyrus to do anything, God has enough wisdom and knowledge and power to do what he needs to do because God can interact with us even more to the point that like we're interacting with one another. And God being smarter than us, he can figure out how to get a child to be named a certain specific thing.
And this is where I differ from a lot of other open theists as well, who are kind of on the further toward the end of like process theology, that sort of end of the pool. And I am not a process theist. I have a much more, I would probably say my opinion of process theism is as negative as my opinion of Calvinism, but I think fewer process theists are saved, if that makes sense. Like I think Calvinism produces more believers, but I think that fewer process theists even believe in something that's
really I don't believe any of them.
I think it's a much smaller number.
So I'm glad you brought that up because I went to UCA for a couple of semesters in Conway, Arkansas, and that's the last bastion at UCA and Hendrix of process theologians because you have Donna Bowman at UCA and you have Jay McDaniel at Hendrix, and they're about the only. That's like that little hub there is like one of the last few hubs where anyone even cares about process.
Claremont out here, Claremont School of Theology in Claremont, maybe an hour from me. That's kind of the West Coast.
Yeah, there's like a couple little hubs left, but I wouldn't consider them even Christian because I don't think that they are in any way Trinitarian, because you can't be with the incarnation, because that's just another one of the
Right.
Jesus fulfilled the most of the initial aims and the so that's
But what I'm saying, I guess, to tie it all down, what I was trying to say is that I differ with the people who are sort of on that end of the pool, who are swimming around in the end of the pool that I would say leads to process theism if you're not careful. What I disagree with when it comes to them is that if God decides unilaterally to bring something about, he has the power to do that, and your free will and your power don't matter. God will overrule you. He suspends people's free will all the time, because I make a distinction between will and power, right? There's a will is just the ability to choose or desire something, but then the power is the ability to bring about that will, right?
Right.
And I use the example in the Q&A, maybe it was a cross examination of the gunman, right? The guy who goes into the local supermarket with a gun, and he's going to take out all these people, but then that's his will, and he's exercising the power to do it. But then a police officer comes, tackles him to the ground using his will and his power, overpowering the gunman, and now taking away his power, but he still retains the will.
I make that
you can even will against your nature to a certain degree. I will to fly like a bird, but I can't fly like a bird.
Right. We make that distinction all the time on this channel to our
free will is not a superpower.
Like, use your free will to fly. Well, I am using my I'm freely willing to fly. I just lack the power to do it. There's a difference. Like
people make that mistake all the time on both sides of this debate. They'll say, well, you can't just freely will to lift a boulder. Well, yes, I can. Every time I watch a superhero movie, I will like that. I just can't do it.
Your will, like, so if Braxton was to do what half the viewers of this channel wish and tie my hands behind the chair and duct tape my mouth so I can't speak, I'm still willing to speak. He's just taken away my capacity to speak, but that's not violating my free will or overriding my will to make me no longer will to talk. I just lack the capacity to talk if he tied me up and duct taped my mouth. So,
and to be clear, I think God can do both. I think that he can overrule your will and your power.
Yeah. I just think on Molinism, most of that's accomplished through power, and God doesn't necessarily need to overrule the will, because he can orchestrate whatever he needs to get you to will to do that anyway freely. So I think Molinism is actually more helpful there, because if not your concern, but the concern of many open theists is to preserve free will. People
wait a minute.
Or even more, like Chris Fisher says, I don't care about free will. God can control you like a robot if he wants to. Who cares? The point is that the Bible doesn't let us assume that that's always the case. That's
right.
There's also another way he could will us that's almost like the view that God knows our nature so well and knows our past actions that he could predict with a higher degree of certainty what we're going to do. You could say something like that. I mean, there are people right now, they're like quote unquote magicians who can expose you to a certain word over and over again without you realizing it, until you end up answering it to a question that he knows you're going to answer it because he has suggested it so much. Well, if human beings who have only lived 30 or 40 years on this planet are able to pull that off, I'm sure God could do whatever he needed to do without really much effort at all to get you to name a child a certain thing.
Exhaustive and infinite knowledge of the past, exhaustive and perfect knowledge of the present, right? Including the heart condition and the moral disposition and the past decision-making of every human that currently exists. If even a human with a finite intelligence and finite understanding and finite processing power and finite will and finite power, that would be enormously powerful for prognosticating about the future to high degrees of certainty, right? Yeah. Even for a human. I don't see God has that same ability. There's almost nothing. I would say there is nothing, but I'm going to, modify my claim to be a little bit more modest. There's almost nothing that the Calvinist or the simple foreknowledge person ascribes to God's decree or foreknowledge, exhaustive foreknowledge, divine foreknowledge, respectively, right? There's almost nothing that they ascribe to that isn't better and more biblically explained by his power, his wisdom, and his ability to bring about his plans and his purposes.
Now, my concern with that, Tim, and this kind of takes us back to another discussion, but real quickly, I'll try to make this brief, is so when you say, okay, he knows us so well, he knows our past actions and all that. So based on that body of knowledge, he's able to predict, and it is a prediction, but it's a very, very strong prediction of what you're going to do. The problem with that is it seems the open theist criticism, part of the open theism criticism of Molinism is that these people are libertarianly free. And so that means that they really could do any particular thing, and there's no determinative process that you can use to figure out what they're going to do that way. You can predict, but in this case, isn't it very possible with libertarian freedom that the determinism has been, taken out of the equation enough that yes, while I typically would stop and get that beef jerky stick on the way home, and so God knows that I've done it every day for 2 years, I just might not this time because I'm libertarianly free, and then God would end up being wrong about something. Now, I think you answered this before by saying, well, the things that God doesn't have a sufficient level of certainty about, he just won't say, or he'll say, I might, or he'll say, if you do this, I'll do that, and that sort of thing, right? So help me out here, though, because I still think we end up in a situation where God could be wrong.
Yeah, God says maybe and perhaps in conversation with humans as well. And I think that those, again, I don't see a reason to move away from those things. God being wrong, we talked about this a little bit last week, but I think I want to sharpen the way that we landed on that. God saying something that does not end up being true doesn't mean that he was wrong in the moment. He was making a statement about what was coming, right? But then things change. And then what he said, and this is an issue simply because I see that all over the pages of scripture. God, the example I levied in the debate was the Hezekiah passage where God straightforwardly through the mouth of Isaiah, a prophet who is not a false prophet, tells Hezekiah, get your affairs in order, get your house in order, because you are going to die. You will not recover. And it's just as strong in the Hebrew as it is in English. Those are clear statements of what will happen. Then Hezekiah prays, and God says, okay, fine, you get 15 more years, right? And then that goes extraordinarily poorly for God's plan because Hezekiah uses this newfound life that he has to kind of show off the storehouses to all the people, the representatives.
And we get a bad king out of it.
And then we get Manasseh, who's probably the worst king in the history of that kingdom, right? And he ruled for longer than anyone. I just see this and I'm like, okay, I don't want to say that God is wrong about anything, but God has expectations for what he thinks is going to come to pass that change based on what people choose in the moment. And God is adaptive and able to plan and able to turn those things to still accomplish his purposes. Again, Moses, you read the first four chapters of Exodus. Really, it's in 3 and 4 is where this discussion gets concentrated. But he comes to Moses with version 1 of the plan, right? And version 1 of the plan is, okay, Moses, you and the elders are going to go to Pharaoh, and then, Pharaoh's not going to want to let you go, so I'm going to have to do something then, but then we're going to get you out of here, right? That's version 1 of the plan. And Moses pushes back and says, I'm not that good at talking, God. And God, his anger burns hot at Moses. That's what it says in the passage, clear as day. His anger burns hot at Moses, and he says, have I not made the mouth for speaking and the tongue for saying words, right? And then he gets so frustrated, he says, look, Aaron's walking nearby. Let's rope him into the plan. And then the version 1 was Moses and the elders go to talk to Pharaoh. The elders don't go with Moses. Moses and Aaron go, and Aaron does the talking, right? And he even comes up with cascading contingency plans of signs to use. He says, well, look, they'll believe this sign. But if they don't believe this sign, then you can use this sign. And if they don't believe that one, you can use this sign. And then it says that Moses performed the signs, and then they believed it. So God himself is using sort of like they might believe this one, but maybe if they don't believe that one, you can use this one. And that's just the way that it's presented in Exodus.
It sounds like your response then to the claim that, well, hey, God could get something wrong, God could predict something wrong, is to say, yes, he can. and you have to believe that too, Braxton, on the basis of all these scriptures where he said something was going to happen and then it didn't happen that way. Now, of course, we would come back on that and say, well, yeah, but in each of those passages, we have an alternative explanation, like the ones like
I'd be eager to hear it.
Well, yeah, we have. I mean, there was the thing. I was going to do it again real quick, but like last week, we gave two basic ways of looking at these things. One, and they're different passages that you just referenced, so they would be treated differently. But let's just say, if you apply these ideas of I'm inviting you into intercession for someone, let's say, or I'm interacting with you with the potentiality that something might change. So if my dad comes to me and says, Braxton, I'm going to go down here to the coffee shop here in a little while. He's telling me that so that I can say, hey, I'll go with you. Or actually, let's go out and eat breakfast or something. It's like when God deals with Abraham about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, we kind of agreed, or I don't know if you agreed with this, you did with the garden and Adam's location, but this notion that he's inviting an interaction on this point. And then as far as the anger burning in the case of Moses doing that with God, Pritchett gave the answer that was the experience that God had in the moment, because even if it's the case that he knows it's going to happen propositionally, the experience of it can still affect you in the moment, even if you know you're going to have that experience. So I think we have answers to those, and we can still talk about those more. But it sounds like your answer, am I right, is to say, Braxton, I think you would be committed to this too. And so, yes, there are certain things God doesn't know.
I would say, again, it's about truth statements, right? And truth makers. So first off, I'm not convinced by any of those explanations in terms of what's happening in the passage. I'm just not, but that's all right. We'll come back to them because I do want to kind of continue pushing just a little bit. But the idea of God being wrong, well, he's not wrong in the moment when he says something. Things that God said in the past would happen, change because of emergent circumstances. And in the same way that when a parent says to their child, I'm going to take you guys out for ice cream. Okay. There's an implied conditionality to that. But even if he's more explicit and says, if you guys are good, I'm going to take you out to ice cream. Well, that one is really easy, where if they're not good and they don't go out to ice cream, he can say, no, I said, if you were good. Right. But then he says, even if he were to not give the direct condition, there's still an implied condition, which is, a father saying to their child, I'm going to bless you and I'm going to give you all my material possessions. And then the child dies first. Okay?
So
but all I see you drawing a distinction is God didn't lie, but he was still wrong. Right? Like in the conditional, he wouldn't be wrong, and that happens in scripture where, like he says, if you do X, I'll bless you. If you do Y, I'll curse you.
I think a lot of these are implied conditionals. There are direct and obvious conditionals.
If it's an implied conditional, if it's an implied conditional and he says, I'm going to do X, it still isn't true that he ended up doing X. It's not that he lied, but he was still wrong that he was going to do that.
It's a feature of the biblical record. Again, I go back to Hezekiah. Get your affairs in order. You're going to die. You will not recover. And then he lives 15 more years.
It's not wrong. It's hard to say. If when God says you're going to die, he's not wrong. And then when God does something else to extend his life, that doesn't mean doesn't mean now this previous statement was wrong because God did something else. That's not like saying that God was wrong. God was right when he said it, and then God did something to change it, which makes that prior statement now no longer.
It's obsoleted. It's obsoleted because of new data. Yeah.
Right.
And it's not like he was wrong when he said that. In any, there's any number of ways to talk about this, but I think that the truth value of a thing is set at the actualization of the event. Right. And statements that are prognostications may be accurate so far as they are at the moment, but I wouldn't even call those true or false. Those are statements that are prognostications about what's going to come, whether it's God doing it or humans doing it.
So what is the stipulation about a false prophecy?
So this is an issue only because God also sends false prophets and then says that it's a test to see if the people are going to be faithful to him and they're going to believe his words. So you might want to walk me a little further down the garden path, but I've got some stuff prepared for that.
Well, I just asked a question to anyone on the panel that wants to clarify the wording or something for me. about a false prophet. If anyone makes a
Haven't
prophecy,
heard from Nick in a while.
yeah. But anyway, it seems like if I take if Scripture indicates that if someone gives you a prophecy and it doesn't come to pass, that person is a false prophet, then it would seem to me that this standard that we use for men, that they can fail, and now we should consider them, a false prophet, maybe working for the enemy that way. Then God himself, if he says things about the future that end up not coming to pass, it seems like there's a rub there.
I'm going to just go read. I'm reading Ezekiel 13 because I know that that's one of the passages where
while
this
you
comes
read
up.
that,
I'd like to
I
hear
have
from other people. Yeah.
I have one more question before we move on to the next thing. You were talking about God has exhaustive knowledge of the past and exhaustive knowledge of the present, right? And that's where he can start making prognostications, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a different kind of open theist who uses the same hermeneutics that you would use for the verses you read would come back and say, God doesn't have exhaustive knowledge. He gets reports from angels about what's going on. Why are those anthropomorphic, Tim?
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, a Chris Fisher type, for example, who
the eyes of the Lord is his agents out in the creation, going and gathering information to bring back to them.
So, I mean, what would your response be to that? And I hope that we have a debate on that between two open theists, because that would be more. But just to whet people's appetite, what is your response to that?
My initial response is that it is a lively and fun intramural debate amongst open theists on a subject that no one else has a good answer for.
So you admit that you don't have a good answer for it for your own dynamic.
Well, if we're framing up a debate and we're trying to plan a debate, I don't necessarily know if I want to put all my stuff out on tape for that.
Fair enough.
But my point is that I don't think that if that's the case, right? Let's say we assess the biblical record and we take that literally. Okay. We take it literally that God receives information from messengers who go out and observe for him and bring back
or
reports.
He has to go down to look himself.
Sure. Like in the Abraham passage of Genesis 20:22, right? It's Genesis 12, isn't it?
When he came down to observe what's going on during the Tower of Babel or whatever else.
Right. All that, right? All that. If we take that literally, and again, this is a lively discussion amongst
using the same hermeneutics that you fling at all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
There is a live interpretation of that passage as it's written, that God needs to go and assess something in the present, right? So there's a lot of different ways to cash that out. If we're trying to frame up a debate, I might guard the best of my thoughts for that. But again, that's a discussion where open theists have an answer. I would turn that around and say, So simple foreknowledge, folks. If God has to receive reports in the present, and we take that as literal or metaphorical of God gaining information, what's the answer there? Calvinists, if God, if he writ of decree that this is what's going to happen, he knew it exactly as it would transpire before time began. Why even talk about taking in information and getting reports? I think of like Job 2, right? He's in the council of the other Elohim in the heavens, and he's talking to them. Or I think of the 2 Kings passage with I forget the name of the prophet, where he's saying there's like a war room meeting with God saying, okay, one angel said this and another one said that, and then someone said, well, what if we put a spirit of deceit in his mouth? And God says, okay, that's a good idea, send it, go for it. Things like that. I think open theists have a really kind of an easy time. It's a discussion of how we cash it out and how it makes sense and what way you interpret it on the other side. But I think that the other views have a much harder time making sense of that kind of thing happening.
All right. Well, let's go on to the next. Well, we want to have this debate between open theists. Let me just get to I think this is going to be...
If Chris Fisher gets back in the States, we'll see how that goes. It'd probably be very fun.
Descartes has also said some pretty bafflingly incoherent things about decretalism. Decretalism is different from determinism because God enters into time in the incarnation. If God is decreeing all evil, then this is an attribute of God's that he's expressing in the creation. Ladies and gentlemen, James White believes that God is doing just that. I thought I'd run a little thought experiment. Let's replace the word determined in the following sentence with the word decreed and tell me if there's any substantive difference. God determined from eternity past that 50 million men, women, and children would be trapped in slavery on August 2nd, 2024, most of whom will die in captivity, never having heard the gospel, including thousands who will die today before the sun sets. Now let's read it again, but with the word decreed in there this time. God decreed from eternity past that 50 million men, women, and children would be trapped in slavery on August 2nd, 2024, most of whom will die in captivity, having never heard the gospel, including thousands who will die today.
All right. So this is what this is the your version of what James White does. This is where y'all are both I guess I just have Chris Fisher in the back of my mind, because he would say that both of y'all are engaging in what's called the moralistic fallacy. Like, oh no, if this is true, then this bad thing, isn't this awful? Therefore, we can't believe it because, oh no, it's so bad. And White does this, and we'll get to that, where he did it all through his closing statement, that if God doesn't have certain absolute knowledge, oh no, this, and so this is just both of y'all playing into the just the moralistic, like, look how bad this would be if this was true.
Well, I mean, it's one of those. If I may, just real quick, I in my mind, it's like, this is perfectly valid. If someone drags you into the muck of the pig pen, all right, time to start playing like we're just gonna play like that. It's like Dr. White has been saying this sort of stuff for forever, and so in my mind, it's like, well, if we're gonna argue like this, if we're gonna be silly about it, then let's sack up and do it. Let's go.
Yeah,
let's
but this came out. I get that for normal people, this has emotional persuasiveness to it. And your capital, and in his closing statement, White's capital, oh no, if open theism is true, then God doesn't know this, and how bad would that? But this was where both of y'all had me checking out, because it was like, and White tried this, and I guess because he didn't get, I don't know, but he was trying to say yes to all of these when you kept trying to say, and you were like, no, we got to go through all of these horrible things on your view. And do you think that these kind of emotional arguments land as with most people besides me?
Certainly, I've seen hundreds of comments to the effect that this was what most convinced them to consider it. Now, I'll also push back and say that not every statement of moral implications that we ought to be afraid of or ought to be concerned about is a moralistic fallacy. Not everything that is describing the second and third order consequences is in moral terms is a moralistic fallacy. So,
well, fair enough. But I'm just saying the general tenor of the whole thing is, oh no, if this is true, then this would be awful. Look how bad this is.
I mean, Pritchett, Dr. White has been doing this for, how old is he? Since he popped into the world.
Yeah, he does the same thing. I'm just saying.
Here's the thing, Pritchett. Like, that is the tenor that James White has established for 30 years of ministry. That is how he argues. In my mind, it is perfectly justified to play with the tools he has already basically put out in the open. Now, obviously, you and me, like, not to be rude to him, I heard all that. I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm gonna, no offense. All right, yeah, I know where that's going, so I'll check out. But I mean, for those who don't see that, Pritchett, because you and I are super nerds who have nothing better to do than work out, eat meat, and read books. The average person who doesn't think or doesn't have those issues kind of settled, it's a shot across the bow to get them to wake up. So I think it's valid in the sense of offering a kind of a, I don't know, my dad used to do this when I was, flick you on the forehead. Oh, you got my full attention, get people to kind of consider it. Now, if that's as deep as they go with it, then shame on them. But, in my mind, it's perfectly valid to use it as a flick on the forehead and a rhetorical device to basically show Dr. White, all right, you set the match. Let's start.
Yeah, but he did. This is his whole closing statement was, oh no, look how awful this would be. It was the chosen by God preface of R.C. Sproul. One stray molecule will just wreak havoc over God's. I'm just like, okay.
So the issue here is ascribing morality to something that is morally neutral. In fact, that's what makes something a moralistic fallacy. If we say, for example, that God, being the determiner of all things, would make him the author of evil, oh no, that's so horrible. That's not a moralistic fallacy. That's an accurate moral argument describing an entailment of the statement. Right?
If you accept that premise,
but if we assume that, well, sure, the premise would need to be borne out, right, but that doesn't make it a moralistic fallacy. If we say that, again, I hear Chris Fisher in my mind. He's coming up a lot for someone who's not even in the country right now. But I hear Chris Fisher in my mind too, saying, that people who engage in like greatest possible being conversations say, well, the greatest possible being would obviously have a pink hat. Right. And then this other person says, well, no, clearly the greatest possible being would actually have two pink hats. And all this greatest possible being discussion just becomes a discussion of what people's preferences would be and what they think the greatest. The first guy says, no, if the greatest possible being has 2 pink hats, then that would make him a two hat being. And wouldn't that be so horrible? And that's morally neutral. The moralistic fallacy is ascribing morality to something that's moral.
I'll give you two. I'll give you 2 examples that I think make the point where this can actually be rhetorically potent and do the shock therapy that Nick was talking about on someone, but also actually be non-fallacious. And that is, I think when Christians raise a moral argument for God's existence, or when atheists bring the problem of evil, any of the problem of evil arguments, they are saying something very meaningful that is not fallacious, but does pack a moral punch. Okay. When you start talking about the problem, if an atheist lays out an argument from evil, and in explaining the argument, they talk about bone cancer in kids, that sounds horrific and it's morally potent. And that moral potency and the rhetoric that might support it has moved a lot of people with that argument. And similarly with the moral argument, which is, I don't think, the strongest of our theistic arguments, but a lot of people do, because it packs that moral punch. And if you're saying to someone, if you're pointing to an entailment and saying, like Tim did, look, here's what all this means. Now, and then the implication is that the God you understand? Is that what God is like? Is that your understanding of God? Is that the God the scripture elsewhere gives us? No.
Right.
Oh, well, then that's all wrong then.
It comes back to our axioms. If it's axiomatic that God is good, if it's axiomatic that God has, if God has revealed himself in scripture, and we take that as an axiom rather than something we need to prove, right? Which in the debate, my opponent and I both take that as axiomatic. We both have that as fundamental, unquestioned furniture of our worldview. And then it can be shown that this entailment of the view means God is not morally good. Then that's not a moralistic fallacy. That's a moral argument.
Well, you're just using your man's reasoning. Your thoughts are not God's thoughts, and God can have
his thoughts and his ways are immeasurably higher than mine, not immeasurably lower than mine.
Yeah, well, I always tell people, not our thoughts. Well, of course, Tim's thoughts aren't my thoughts either. Nick's thoughts aren't mine, and mine aren't his either. And
I don't even think.
But whose are higher?
But they're not. But God doesn't have non-thoughts, and He doesn't have unintelligible thoughts, right? I mean, they're still intelligible. So
there's that anthropopathism and metaphor again,
right? That's why He shares them with us in Scripture. So yeah, I was just saying, though, for me, this probably has less purchase, but I see why you could think that. But neither does.
You're just morally calloused, and you are up in your academic ivory
tower.
You're
like David Paulman over here talking about why the moral argument isn't that great, yet. But so many people are moved by it, and that's what's happening to you here.
I'm absolutely not David Paulman, because because he hates presuppers. Presups would point out that for the atheist to make that argument has to borrow capital from my worldview in order to say that these things would be bad in the first place.
That was I'm saying in one respect you're like David Paulman.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, grounding for morality.
Any other comments about that? Because in principle, I agree with you. God is bad if He's doing these things. I agree with that. That's why I'm not a determinist. And why I don't also like the fact that God can, but you would allow God.
It didn't work. It's not that it didn't work on you then, Johnathan Pritchett. It's that it worked on you in the past. That part's been settled. You don't need to hear those arguments again, but they already convinced you once upon a time.
But my pushback is you're okay if God does it some of the time anyway. So
in what sense?
Huh? Well,
does it? What is it in that sentence?
Well, let's say, let's take White's reading of Acts 4. Okay, the early apostles. Let's take his reading on that. Well, you were willing to punt. You said you I have responses to that. I don't even think this is a great proof text for them in the first place. But let's grant everything they think it means. If we were to do that, though, in principle, you're okay if God did do that.
I'm not okay in principle if they're saying it means everything that they think it means. So if God works evil, I don't think that that's tenable. I think that again, because it's axiomatic to my view that God is good. Okay. So if he forces unilaterally for evil things to come across, then I think that's wrong. God shaping evil and guiding evil actions of freely willed creatures toward an assumed end, that it originated in their heart. Maybe they were deceived by the other rebel powers, right? The way that Nick was talking about earlier. I think we remove the biblical ascribing of evil to the enemy powers far too frequently for this conversation. But if God is molding that and aiming that cannon at a specific spot in order to get some kind of an outcome, that's not God making evil things happen. And that could be said to be what he foreordained or predetermined to occur.
In what way is he aiming, though? That's where you get into the metaphysics. And how could you say that that's how
Two
you
things
answer
are true at
metaphysically
once.
is going to come about to where, because there are
Two things are true at once. Jesus dying on the cross was the wisdom of God's plan from before time began, 1 Corinthians 2:7. It was the mystery that was hidden from all the rest of God's enemies, that was specifically the information that he reserved, that if they had known it when they killed Jesus, they wouldn't have done it. That's true. And it's also Jesus's death and burial and resurrection is the greatest and most beautiful expression of love and sacrifice. Even, we're talking honor shame dynamics. The honored party, or the party that deserves the honor, deigning to show love.
Make it sound as sanctimonious as you can. So what?
Now, that's true on this side.
Yeah, right,
but on this side, it's also true. It's also true that it is the work of evil beings.
Great.
Who
Yes,
saw
got it.
the
Got
only
it.
truly innocent one.
You've made a distinction that I could grant before I ask my question. Doesn't answer the question. How, in what way is God's influence on the cannon to aim it, the agents? In what way is he influencing the agents to aim the cannon a specific way at Jesus? How you answer that does not change whether this is what they're doing is awful, what God is doing is granted, give you all that. So what? In what way is God, how is God influencing the agents to aim the cannon? And how you answer that is going to determine how this is any bit different than determinism.
Sure, could be just laying a trap that they'll freely traipse into. Could be supervening their power and their will in some way or other. He could do that. Okay, I've already granted that he could do that. This is part of the fun discussion.
So the Calvinist pushback then is, okay, so they're already guilty sinners doing some kind of evil, so God's going to overpower their will and their capacities to aim that evil in a specific direction because they're evil anyway. Okay, well, the whole human race was guilty in Adam on Calvinist precept. So therefore, why can't God do that from the garden forward?
So why the
on
question
all things
isn't,
whatsoever come to pass?
Can God have a morally permissible reason for not intervening? Or for
Dr. Weber, they think of all the billions and billions and zillions and gazillions of free choices that occurred prior to the crucifixion that would have to be aimed.
I don't grant that they have to be aimed. That's another part of this issue here. Like,
okay.
We get so used to thinking in terms of it's got to be 100% of the way this way or the other way. And I don't think that follows.
No,
I think
that's not my argument. My argument is if you're okay with this much, then
that's a slippery slope.
You should be okay if it's the whole shebang, and that you just conceded the point to Calvinists.
Slippery slope fallacy, my friend. I don't think, or fallacy of composition. Just because it's true in this way doesn't mean it has to be true this way in every other instance.
My argument is not that it is. My argument is why are you okay with this much, but God forbid it can't be as much as the Calvinist ones. That's what I'm saying.
Now you're ascribing a moralistic fallacy to me when I'm not advancing one. What I am saying is that I'm an evidentialist. When it comes to this, I just want to take the scriptural record as clearly and as accurately as I can. And there are certainly times when God twists and uses, I think in the chat earlier, the example of God using Assyria to punish Jerusalem was brought up. And then the very next chapter is God getting upset at Assyria for going too far, right? So I'm just looking at the biblical record here. There are things that God does utilize and advance, and there are things that God intervenes in. There are things that God doesn't intervene in, and he doesn't advance.
Well, I'm just playing devil's advocate, like literally, in my opinion. No, I don't think Calvinists are literally.
There are some people saying that they're a little bit lost. Let's pull it back in.
Okay. If you're okay with God using some evil for this thing, then the Calvinists would say, then why are you so upset if God does it for more than you're willing to grant? That's
what do you mean by using some evil?
Because
because there are a lot of things that could be packed into
Right,
that
and that
statement
goes
that I would
back to
probably
how
disagree
you
with.
think God's influence on them to aim their evil cannon towards Jesus at that point.
Who's aiming a cannon at Jesus?
This was, he said, I'm using Tim's.
I used the idea of a cannon being
It's an
a
analogy,
I'm pretty
Braxton.
well caught up on The Chosen, and I didn't see that.
Oh, that's a season 6 thing. You'll just have
No,
to
it's in the it's in the sequel to the Passion. That's where that.
All right. Well, I'm
Oh,
just
yeah.
saying that's what I hear the Calvinists would push back on. It's like, well, if you're okay with this much determinism, why not more?
But it's not determinism.
Depends on how
Because
you
determinism
answer
is
the
that
aiming.
100% of all things are determined. God determining things, God foreknowing some things, determining others, and then being unable to know with certainty other things is a feature of my view that's not possible in
Okay,
any of the other
I'll
views.
rephrase. If you're okay with God using them as action figures for a short period of time, why can't God just? Why is
I
it
don't
so
grant that he used them
awful?
as action figures.
How so?
Because there's a difference between God laying a trap ahead of someone. If you are, we could
Yeah,
we
this
could
is Leighton
frame this as
Flowers
like a
sting
trolley
operation
problem.
thing. I get it. I actually more or less. I think he's trying too hard. This verse just says that God predestined a thing to happen, and these were the players that did it. But that's more a Leighton Flowers type answer, assuming more than what is needed for this passage to get out of it or whatever. Calvin, how do you get around this? But it's not.
We can think about Pharaoh too. We can think about Pharaoh again. It's around 50-50. I have to go back and read through Exodus again in some detail and some depth, probably with some Carmen Imes material in my hands. But when I'm looking through all that and I'm seeing that transpire, there are a number of times Pharaoh hardens his own heart.
Yeah.
There are a number of times God hardens Pharaoh's heart.
And there's 3 different words there used
Right.
all throughout the text.
Right.
Yeah. And so, well, my answer to that is where it says kind of strengthen or encourage or embolden. It's God saying, I'm going to help you be the most you want to be, and make it appear as if you can accomplish it and nothing will stand in your way until God gets in their way. So it doesn't take a lot of, so you see by the point where it's like the Red Sea is parted, you're dug in. It doesn't really take more conviction to keep going and pursuing. It takes guts. And so it's going to look as if nothing can stop you. God can manipulate that without even, he can strengthen the resolve. He can influence in such a way that literally aims that cannon towards going all the way into your own destruction. That's how I understand that. But a Calvinist would say to me, like I'm saying to you, okay, but why can't it be more than that on backwards through the causal chain?
Again, this is if that were levied at me, I don't have to go any further than to say that it's a fallacy of composition. Just because it's true in one instance and in one place doesn't mean it has to be true in every other instance in every other place. We have a lot of scriptural record to say.
The thing
We
is,
have a lot of scriptural record to say that that's not what's going on in other passages.
Then you'd have to hash that out from a kind of a top-down level.
The problem is they have to prove
me
that it is that way 100% of the time, and I just have to say I have one example where it isn't.
It sounds to me like
your whole debate.
Wait. What's the thrust here? So you could be arguing 2 things. On the one
I'm
hand,
trying to carry the Calvinist water because we.
Yes, I know. Let me help you. Okay. So let me grab the other bucket.
Pritchett.
You're having
Let Braxton
trouble.
talk.
So you could be saying on the one hand that if you're okay, I mean, you kind of said this. If you're okay with determinism in one case, then what's the big deal in determinism across the board? And then on the other hand, you could be saying if determinism itself, in terms of human choices, is morally problematic in a way that you don't think God would do it, then how can you allow it in even one case? Now, in response to the first of those 2 types of ways of saying this, I think that Tim could just say, well, my thoughts about that don't really matter. The thing is, I don't think Scripture gives us that God does this across the board all the time. I think it's pretty clear that it doesn't, but that doesn't mean he couldn't do it in one case. That's kind of the one side of this. The other side of this, which says, no, it's morally reprehensible, so how could you allow it in even one case? That might be the one where Tim would have to answer. How would you answer that, Tim?
Yeah, again, yeah, and thank you for making that distinction because that is helpful. Yeah, if everything is determined, so whatever, fallacy of composition. I've already given a response to that. I would need to see a case made that I don't agree with a priori coming into this discussion. I would need to see a case made for why supervening someone's power and causing them to go in a different direction, why that is inherently immoral. Because I don't think it is. I don't think that it's evil in any way to supervene and to use your will and power. Again, let's think of police officers. Okay, I don't want to necessarily go to the military. I would agree, military people do this all the time, but military morality is fraught on a lot of other points too, even though I'm a huge supporter of our troops and all that. But let's just talk about the police. Okay, a police officer exercising his will to stop a bad guy and exercising his power, okay, going back to our conversation earlier, to stop a bad guy from doing something is capital G, good. That is a good thing. Also, a police officer choosing to refrain from using his will and his power to let a sting operation come together, right? So that you can get more people in jail at the other side of this thing is also capital G good. Then a police officer using a mole or an informant.
Now, there you go.
Okay, and having them go and do even maybe participate or even going undercover, joining the mob, right?
Yeah.
And engaging in criminal activity, even for the purpose of, on the other side of that thing, getting a bunch more people in jail. There's a case.
I think that's the piece you need. You could say that the police took someone who was already wicked and involved in these criminal activities, took them, and then made a mole out of them in order to not arrest them or something, and then send them back to go do the same things they were doing as an informant, and even tells them to carry out particular criminal behavior.
This goes even into even God's wrath on the pages of Scripture, 9 times out of 10 is described as God giving people over to the consequences of the choices that they're currently making and allowing.
And like in the Pharaoh case, you've got the judicial hardening there. It's a punishment in and of itself.
Yeah. When people start dumping metaphysical claims into things like Pharaoh, I'm like, well, hang on. I mean, I can interact with both you and the circumstances surrounding you in a way that would harden your heart towards me. Why can't God just do the same thing in his ways of doing that? Similar to
that would be a different answer than saying that God deterministically controlled this one person.
Right. Because I don't think that God deterministically needs to control anybody, because God is agent acting in the world, and I can make anyone, I can harden, I can strengthen, embolden, whatever language you want to use, make obstinate in some cases,
right.
Kazakh,
Pritchett,
and whatever other word.
Are you carrying water for people who aren't here?
Just to make it fun, but we can go on to the
It's
next.
been fun. I love this stuff.
I'm just saying,
I don't mind
if I can harden it's like with foreknow and predestined. If I can harden someone's heart, why can't God? If I can, without determinism, if I can foreknow and predestine Braxton's future, why can't God do it?
Okay, Nathaniel K, thank you for that super chat. It says, Trinity guys, in God's eternal now with no time or sequence, has he been punishing in hell for eternity the very people he is patient for and wants to save? Trinity guys, in God's eternal now. Well, I don't really hold that eternal now position, so
that's a
I
question.
don't know. So if you took my position as the way that classical theists think about it is a timeless state, then I don't think he's been punishing anyone in hell for all that time, because I don't think there's time there. And I also don't hold the eternal now view.
Time language is so messy. I think you just slipped between 3 and 4 different.
I do. Hey, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. We've talked about time a lot on this show, and I used to try very cautiously, and I still, if I think about it, try to be very cautious to say this tenseless existence sans the physical universe. I usually say sans time, sans the physical universe. But Pritchett always used to throw things at me and yell at me and abuse me for adding all the caveats. So I just stopped.
Thank you. Let's go to the
I don't see any reason to presuppose them, but anyway.
Let's get into some cross-examination before time runs out, because I think there was a lot of interesting stuff there between the two of y'all that I think we could have a lot of fun with.
I believe that Moses had a better plan than God.
I didn't say that. I'm simply saying
Then
that
what
the
else does it
text,
mean?
the text shows Moses disagreeing with God, apparently not acting as though it was all fated and determined. He's disagreeing with God and pushing back against the particulars of God's plan, saying, they will not listen to me.
Right. And so you think that this was God didn't know that, and he's learning this from Moses, and Moses gives him a better plan. Is that your position?
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that
Well,
the
you need
text
to say
appears.
something.
Right. I'm telling you what the text is saying.
Well, but whenever I press you on something, you back off it. Well, I'm not saying that, but then you turn around and say, but the text says that, and then when I push on the text, you go, well, I'm not saying that. It's
But you're
very
not pushing on the
frustrating,
text. You're not pushing on the text. You're pushing to try to get me to give a particular answer, and you're sort of pigeonholing the answer that you want me to give by how you're framing it.
That's a lot of fun there. You didn't start with the calling out on the loaded question. Did Moses have a better plan than God? I mean, that is a loaded way to ask the question. That's where I reject the premise of your question. So
Yeah, I did use that at certain points, right? I was saying, well, there's a false assumption baked into your question. I was willing to call him on that if and when it arose, but I mean, I don't want to just, because we're not going to get anywhere substantive, and I'm not going to be able to make a better case and give a better answer if I don't allow him to at least give me some weirdly worded question.
now I rewatched this portion of the debate. I don't understand where he was pushing back from the text on that.
It's a moralistic fallacy, or maybe it's not a moralistic fallacy. Maybe he's saying that if I actually believed that Moses had a better plan than God, then that would in some way make Moses better than God.
Right.
Which that would be, again, if we're going back to our axioms,
Yeah.
if it's true, if you can frame up a syllogism that logically leads to the conclusion that Moses had a better plan than God, that would make Moses in one way a better being, a higher being than God, which is untenable, given we think God is the greatest. He's the creator. He's the maximally good, all that.
My problem beyond it just being a loaded question, though, is I don't think this this dialogue between God and Moses scores points for either side, actually. Moses, I can't talk very well, whatever else he comes up with for this. And I'm thinking that doesn't really, I mean, I don't see how propositionally God already knew that he was going to. So I just didn't see this as a very good passage that scored points for either side. But maybe you want to get into it a little bit more than what you were trying to demonstrate. Because
have you just been telling Tim that you don't agree with any of his points?
No, I don't agree with Dr. White.
He's pulling the old man card like,
this,
listen
because
here,
I don't
young
think
man,
it
I didn't
scores
like the way
Dr.
you did that.
I don't think this dialogue between God and Moses benefits either side. And I think that when Dr. White framed it as better and, asking a very loaded question, I don't think he was going to get any points out of it just by showing, because God still knew how it was all going to be. So I didn't think this did anything good for him, but I also don't see where this interaction does anything good for his position either.
Thank you, Warren. Exactly. I can't understand how you could possibly say that this passage doesn't score any points from my point of view. Because again, if God eternally decreed that this conversation with Moses goes exactly the way that it looks, or that he eternally foreknew the exact specifics of what this conversation would look like, his responses and his approach are very strange. Him getting mad. Okay, I'll ask you a question. Okay. Going into a conversation with, let's just, James White. Okay, you're going into a conversation with James White. If you know ahead of time how it's going to go, does that make you more likely to get mad when he does what you know he's going to do, or less likely when you know already what he's going to do?
See, I don't agree with that, because I know going into certain conversations with Braxton, I'm not feeling the anger that I will feel when I already know Braxton's answer when he actually says it to my face. So no, I don't buy that at all. And as far as God having this dialogue with Moses and saying, okay, well, we'll do it this way. I think that God can have conversations that he already knows how they're going to go, just in principle, the same way I do. And to reach a desired end, already have the contingencies gamed out, and having certainty of how that's going to game out doesn't change it any more than me having less than certainty how to game out, even if it's more or less what I'm going to accomplish, what I figured anyway, just having those kind of conversations with Braxton. So
it's just so odd to me, because my personal experience, maybe I can just frame this in terms of my personal experience, right? In my personal experience, if I'm going into a conversation where I know the other person is a bad faith actor, they're going to treat me in a certain way, they're going to act in a certain way, and maybe I even know, like they've made a bunch of social media posts or whatever saying this, and this about me, and I already know their thoughts, okay, ahead of time. Even me being a fallible human, being a morally compromised fallible human. If that person, I go into this conversation and it goes exactly how I thought it would go, I have steeled myself emotionally for what I'm anticipating, and I'm not going to be as swayed by it. I'm not going to be as moved by it. This is exactly what I did in the debate. I knew what his actions would be like, so I resolved ahead of time to say, you know what? I'm just going to let that roll off me like water off a duck's back. That is something I can do as a morally compromised, still battling with my flesh human. I just find it so strange to assume that if God knows exactly what will happen, that he then gets frustrated.
But I can have conversations.
Wait. Maybe there are circumstances, Tim, where it's actually wrong that you're not more upset than you are about certain things. And God should be upset about certain things because you don't have the awareness of his holiness
just like Braxton doesn't have the awareness of my holiness, that I know he's going to give me the bad answer. We're going to have to pivot, but it's still,
let's think about
that's the best reading of Exodus 3 and 4. It says God's anger burned hot at Moses. Yeah. And he's like, fine, let's get Aaron's walking by. And he says, fine, let's rope Aaron into the plan too. I don't think that that's the best reading of the text.
It may not be, but let's get it out there as fairly as we can. So,
sure.
So if a woman cheats on her husband with some other man, and he knows about it, and he's going to confront her about it, would it not be like morally acceptable and maybe no, let's go further. Let's go all the way to the podcaster's favorite person to talk about. Let's say Hitler. We caught Hitler and you go in to question Hitler. If you're not a little mad, a little angry, doesn't that mean there's something wrong there? Like after what he's done, you know what I mean?
Is there a moral equivalency between Hitler doing what Hitler did and Moses saying no?
No, but that's why we test these things in hypotheticals at the extreme. So that's the extreme. Hitler, like one of the most wicked human beings who's ever lived, right? So from God's perspective, you know, whatever is happening in the conversation with Moses might be something that would upset his holiness. I don't know. But it might be a bad way to look at this text. I'm just saying, I think there are circumstances.
Sure. There are probably circumstances where God's anger at a situation. I will say there are definitely circumstances where God's anger at a situation and his frustration with the situation is justified. I simply take that almost always as evidence that it didn't go the way he wanted it to go, and that he had hopes for it to do this thing, and then it went this way instead. Right? I think of Jeremiah.
Well, now the first thing you said, the first thing you said, I could agree with. The second thing I couldn't. The first thing you said is, you said something like, I just have to believe or whatever that it didn't go the way he wanted it to go. I'm fine. Again, I'm fine with lots of things on my Molinist worldview. Lots of things not going the way God wanted them to go, because I don't think he got the perfect world that he wanted. He just got, as we said before, the quote unquote, well, we'll say most appropriate to his goals, whatever they may be, most of the available worlds. Yeah.
I think of another passage. Let me dig it up while I'm here.
I'm still with Braxton on the fact that it is morally appropriate to express outrage at particular responses, even if you know they're coming, because we all do that all the time, and it's appropriate to do that. So I think that alone is sufficient. But yeah, I'm
not going to run away, though. I disagree with Pritchett that this gives you no points for your side of things, because I agree that on the face of it, I see your point, and it's not as though, like, if you're dragging your comb through the hair of Scripture, hey, this is one of the places it's going to get hung up on an open theism idea. So I think it gives you some points. I just think if I'm already convinced otherwise, what would I say about this text? That's kind of the point where
why can't God have knowing that even on Calvinism, having the I know you don't like utilitarian, but having the utilitarian that seeing this interaction is profitable for subsequent audiences. I mean, even on I'm not saying it's a good answer, but it's
the ends don't justify the means.
Well, let's explore that anyway, because if it were the case that this is for subsequent audiences, what is it supposed to be illustrating? That you might make God mad and change his mind? I mean, what?
Right.
What
That
are
if you
hoping
complain
for?
loud enough, you're going to get God mad and he'll change his
Well,
mind.
I
to
mean,
still
if
get
you're a
the thing done.
cessationist, you're not going to have conversations with God anyway. But just kind of the
That's a red herring, my friend. I've got another passage actually. So Jeremiah 13, I think, or no, Jeremiah 3, and I'm going to just look at verses like 6 through 10 ish. So then the Lord said to me in the days of Josiah the king, have you seen what faithless Israel did? She went up on every high hill and under every green tree, and she was a harlot there. I thought, after she has done all these things, she will return to me. But she did not return, and her treacherous sister Judah saw it. And I saw that for all the adulteries of faithless Israel, I had sent her away and given her a writ of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she went and was a harlot also. Because of the lightness of her harlotry, she polluted the land and committed adultery with stones and trees. Yet in spite of all this, her treacherous sister Judah did not return to me with all her heart, but rather in deception, declares the Lord. So it's like this went a way God didn't want on multiple different levels. And he was saying, I thought she would return to me. And then she didn't. And then her sister went and did the same thing. Right? This seems to be the thrust of the text to me. I don't know how to get away from that. And the problem is we have to come up with a lot of like ad hoc or post hoc rationalizations for what this passage must mean, given our other pre-commitments, if we don't assume that God can have things go away he didn't foreknow that they would go, and go in a way he didn't want them to go. I don't know other ways to handle texts like this.
well,
Speechless, huh?
I was reading the chat. There was a question.
we're kinda-
Pritchett, does anybody
Anything
Nick,
but
Nick
answering
here,
the critique.
does anyone want to defeat this argument where Tim just basically proved open theism?
okay, say it one more time.
The whole thing?
He tells this one, he says about, go ahead, read it again. Say
Sure.
it again.
Then the Lord said to me in the days of Josiah the king, have you seen what faithless Israel did? She went up on every high hill and under every green tree, and she was a harlot there. I thought, after she has done these things, she will return to me. But she did not return, and her treacherous sister Judah saw it. And I saw that for all the adulteries of faithless Israel, I had sent her away and given her a writ of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she went and was a harlot also. Because of the lightness of her harlotry, she polluted the land and committed adultery with stones and trees. Yet in spite of all this, her treacherous sister Judah did not return to me with all her heart, but rather in deception, declares the Lord. So
the key there
she
is
goes
I
and-
thought.
Right,
I
because
thought she would return to me, but she did not return. And then Judah did the same thing. Judah
it
was supposed to fear,
I
and then she
expected
didn't either.
grapes, and you got me sour grapes. Same type of
Right.
deal. And you're saying God's expectation or his thought in this verse, that means he absolutely had no knowledge that it wouldn't turn out the way that.
I didn't say he had no knowledge. I said he had hopes. He had hopes and designs that it would go this way. He set the thing up hoping that they would be faithful to him, and then they were not. And he seems upset by that. He said, surely after I've done all of this, I hope that maybe it's in probability judgments. There's a higher chance, there's a higher probability that they will return to me. And then it doesn't go the way that he wants, and he's upset by it. And then Judah does the same thing, and he's upset by that too. He's clearly not happy about how this went. And it sounds, the plain face value meaning of the text, the way that it's written, it sounds like, I thought it would go this way, and then it went this way. And then it went so badly this way that this person or this whole other people group got taken up in the wrong things that the first people group.
Yeah,
was
just
doing
like
as well.
God expected grapes, but all he got was sour grapes. Yeah,
I like that you keep surfacing that passage. We can go there too if you'd like.
Right, and I'm just saying, like from my perspective, I mean, as someone who's not an open theist, I'm happy with God's having that thought. That doesn't mean that was the only thought he ever had, as far as how the future would turn out. So you would.
But my view is the only one that allows for that flexibility.
It goes back to the experiential thing. I mean, if
he didn't say, I thought I would feel like they would go.
Glorious office that I have here. I mean, and I'm still a malcontent.
But he's not talking about his feelings there. He's not talking about how it feels for them to go and whore themselves after other gods.
No, but
he's talking about what he thought would happen. It's a propositional statement about his prognostication on the future. What he thinks is coming to pass, and then it doesn't come to pass.
Word means too. So
Which one?
thought-
Is it Yada?
Amar.
Amar. Okay, interesting.
Pause for a second because I want to hear what Nick has to say because he hasn't said too much. But I
Well,
also
I
want to
don't
get
have
this.
much to contribute because
I wanna get
New
this-
Testament nerd stuff.
Well, I just want to get
Yeah.
this super chat from not Michael W. Smith, but Michael Smith for $5. I would like for Tim and Leighton to debate open theism.
If he would be willing to, that one would be a lot of fun, and it would probably be a little bit less rancorous.
I doubt that Leighton will do that, but he might. I don't know.
Yeah. He's got open theists that come on his show on a regular basis, and everyone's like, he's going to be an open theist one day. Well, I mean, you know, like I said, though, for me, I mean, there's a difference between expressing something in the experience of it occurring and then not.
Oh, wait. Nick was going to answer.
Oh,
Oh,
no,
he-
I wasn't going to answer the reading.
Dang it.
But
He's just going to talk
it's-
about the word.
Well, the word does seem to denote something not like thought, it's something more like to speak or to say or to promise or to avow or something like that. So thinking, we're not talking about God's thoughts, because I mean it literally says in 3:6 the Lord said to me, you know, Amar, then verse 7 and same word, you know, Amar. So it's more about speaking. So I mean thoughts and stuff like that. Someone could argue that it is something in terms of a promise or a command. It really, my issue is not with what anyone is directly saying. It's more a matter of, and this is my issue just with English translations, especially of Hebrew in general, is that English translations of Hebrew tend to really sand off the nuances and intricacies of the Hebrew text. And it's very easy, and for me at least, to read the English and then go do something, then pick up the Hebrew text and be like, oh, that doesn't say 180 degrees something different, but there's a nuance to this that I didn't see, that now I have to rethink what I was thinking.
Yeah. And
so-
I'm with Amber, because even, I mean, Jeremiah is like, I didn't bring you out of the desert and give you a whole bunch of commands. Wait a minute. That's exactly what happened. So, I mean, there's a little bit of hyperbole and just expressive thing here
Okay.
that I think I can
I'm
deal
going to do
with.
the same thing. Totally fine. I agree with all that. Yeah, there's a difference. I thought it might be Yada there, but if it's Walmar, it's a little different.
Yeah.
So, but I'm going to do the same thing I did during the debate, where it's like, okay, let's try to say this same sentence back with decree versus determine in the sentence, and let's see if it really sounds any different, right? So with think, okay, I thought that after she had done all this, she would return to me, but she did not, and her unfaithful sister Judah saw it. If he says, I said she had done all this, that after she had done all this, that she would return to me, and she did not. I don't see too much of a difference in terms of what idea that's expressing. The idea is, I thought, or I said, I made a statement that this is going to go one way. And then in the other side of that statement, it just sounds like he's saying, but it didn't go the way that I hoped it would. Now, if we sand it off and say, okay, look, it's not a statement about God's propositional knowledge, totally fine, happy to not grant that part of the category. But if we're looking at this from God wanting God getting what he wants or not getting what he wants, I think it's pretty clear from the text still, regardless of what verb is used for God thinking or saying in this case, he still isn't getting what he wants.
Yeah,
Sure, but it's
we're all
question
okay with that, so no
say,
point for theism here.
is say, my point is, and I'll push back on that, is an issue already is, and I see this happening in myself, so this is for me to remember too, is, I'm not going to say that because I have not fully fleshed out that thought, so I'm just going to stop that. I'll just say this. Speaking there, we need to know what, this is the analytic theology part that kicks in. What does this actually mean? I understand the results or the issues that come from that, but if this means to say in terms of promise or command, then there's interesting elements there that may at least nuance what you were saying. I think it's too easy just to do the decretalism thing, because the whole point is to make the text kind of go there. But I think there's something that needs to be said about maybe taking a few minutes, and at least for me, reading it again, being like, oh, it may say exactly what it seems to have said or mean it, but we need to
I've
be
got
more
my cup of
precise
coffee
with
here.
that.
Let's take a minute and then let's swap in different.
I don't. I have to go in like 8 minutes.
Oh,
I have
okay.
to go pick up my son. So I just
Well,
wanted to say
I appreciate
something.
your presence.
Well, my presence is wonderful, so you're welcome.
It's glorious.
My silence,
Glorious presence.
But no, I mean, I take your point. Like, I think the end result, the result is the same, but we need to be careful with the method of getting there, and that's where I see, and I see Dr. White doing this all the time, where he goes on this sort of methodological thing. I'm like, the conclusion matters, but the method matters too, because you can get to the right place. And I think we as Christians need more precision with that. And I'm not saying I'm the most precise guy because I'm rambling now, but and I'm saying that to myself as well.
Solid, yeah, and solid exegesis of the original languages is usually my entire jam. So you're very right in all that.
I know you are. And that's why I'm like, I wonder what he would. I wonder if this little piece.
Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, but Tim,
wait, real quick.
I have that memorizing the Hebrew according to Dr. White. So.
Well, you can read Greek better than I can. My Greek's I can't read Greek. Well, I can't speak Greek. I can read it, but
you can't speak English either.
We've got some super chats to get through. Nick, if I don't get to say goodbye to you, I'll see you later, man.
I want to throw something out. One thing before we go any further to just tie a bow on this whole discussion and put it behind us, unless the super chats are about this too.
Allowing you to go in front of a super chat is a big conceit for us because money talks more than guests. But
I appreciate the concession. I appreciate
one
the concession.
time.
Let me swap in some of the other possible renderings of that word's full lexical range. Okay, promise or declare were some of the ones that Nick just surfaced as possibilities. If he says, I promised that after she had done all this, she would return to me, but she did not, and her unfaithful sister Judah saw it. If I declare that after she had done it all this, she would return to me, but she did not, and her unfaithful sister Judah saw it. I don't think any of those different nuances of meaning of the word Walmar, which is good. Yes, methodological precision is exactly what we need to do here, and good solid exegesis of the original language. I think any version of the different meanings of that word's lexical range get us to the same end result. Just my thought.
All right, let's hit some of these. First of all, we have someone in the chat who did not give a super chat. That is complaining. I'll just go ahead and say this person's screen name is Fountain Penis, and they think that we're being like not charitable or not. It's not a good use of our time to be talking about these deeply intricate things about God. It does no actual good for anyone. No one's edified. No one changes their mind. And the questions are so abstract that even if they do change their minds, it doesn't do any real good. So here's the thing. Actually, minds do get changed because of theological conversations. I just recorded an interview yesterday with the Faithiest Atheist where we talk about where we disagree and argue with each other. And I'll be posting that probably tomorrow. And he mentioned in that stream that I had changed his mind about something. I've had my mind changed. And guess what? The resources that we so appreciate from scholarly sources on down to lay level sources are all created by people who have had these kinds of conversations and come to conclusions and then written their thoughts out after arguing with each other. But if none of that means anything to you, I'd like you to consider two things. Number one, in the words of the great philosopher Obi-Wan Kenobi from episode 4, who's the greater fool, the fool or the fool who follows him? I'll just let that sink in for just a minute. And then lastly, I would say some people play golf, some people play football. We talk about God. Sorry if that's not good enough for you, but that's just how we roll. All right, back to you guys. Oh, no, I've got super chats. First of all, do I hear a hear from you, Pritchett? You're muted.
Oh man, he's been
here. And I'll also say that people can. I mean, you don't have to watch this.
Right. That's the point of the Obi-Wan Kenobi reference.
Yeah. I mean, you can.
Has Tim ever considered John Frame's? Thank you for the super chat, a pastor's thoughts, and the ones from last week. Has Tim ever considered John Frame's lordship properties or Scott Oliphant's covenantal properties? Both views allow for classical omniscience and God changing in creation.
Scott Oliphant also got in trouble over it. He had to go in front of the, the panel.
I was going to bring that up if you didn't.
So, I mean, I'm okay with it. But then again, my job is okay with me changing my mind about things or having views that are outside of beyond the bounds of what other people say about the Westminster Confession of Faith that doesn't actually say, but that what their reading of it is that he has to abide by whatever ecclesiastical body. So, I mean, I felt sorry for Scott. He's just trying to be dealing with the Bible within his tradition. And they're like, nope, that's a step too far. Frame is
he said the quiet part out loud for a certain view inside of his theological tradition that they didn't want to have said out loud. Right. And that's all.
Now Frame, it's been a while since I've read knowledge.
Yeah, a theology of lordship, I think is what he's referring to.
Actually, I think it's referring to the prior work. I mean, that book too probably is a distillation of like the doctrine of the knowledge of God and all of those, that series of books, which it's been forever since I read Doctrine of the Word of God. And
I'll simply say this: yes, I've considered them because they have. We'll just say both of them. Both of them broadly have Reformed Calvinist underpinning philosophical claims that are part of the axiomatic furniture out of which the arguments grow. I don't agree with them essentially from the start. I don't grant most of the premises that they take as givens.
Yeah, a lot of the scaffolding there is presupposing a lot of stuff that is unnecessary from any of our perspectives. So
right.
There was a couple more super chats.
Yeah. We got the Christian Metalhead says, friendly monetary reminder that Calvinism is false. Also, you did fantastic, Tim.
Amen.
Recently found out that you also affirm my understanding of conditional immortality.
Amen.
By the way, we should play Smash sometime.
Let's go. I love it. Love this guy.
Mario
that is a small center circle of that particular Venn diagram. People that are like into theology in the first place, and then Smash Brothers. That's a pretty small group.
And I
don't know if you guys know, but I'm a competitive Smash Brothers player out here in Colorado as well.
I've played a few times, but I was never obsessive on it. I do know that it's, I think, got the record now for the video game played the longest. Someone played it for like a week or something. I don't know. Okay. And then here, $20 from Roy Stutzer says, and thank you for that super chat, says, if the future exists as reality, then God's expressions of anger would seem inconsistent. Yet we live through God who sustains all things. Time isn't a separate entity, but a reflection of his power in reality's unfolding. Thoughts?
Could be.
Yeah, I mean, I've generally liked Roy's comments about time, and he's definitely up to date on the most.
I mean, could be very much. I mean, I'm still, which again, I'll stress, makes a lot of this conversation even more difficult once you stop making assumptions about time that you used to just take for granted that are like, whoa. And so that's kind of where I'm having, issues with that. But yeah, that could be, because I don't know that. I know that I disagree with B theory, but I'm somewhere between the presentism and A theory.
Presentism is A theory. This is the issue, is that you're either a presentist or an eternalist, and a presentist is an A theorist and an eternalist is a B theorist. They are coterminous.
Well, okay. So on as far as I understand A theory, though, the past did exist, but it no longer does.
So the past, yeah, exactly.
In a real sense,
that exists is the present. Well, it's not necessarily.
You need
it's not
B theory for
A theory
to exist, and it's in reality. But on A theory, it did exist. Not simply as a unit of existence, but
the issue in here is all in, again, the baggage we're loading into the word exists or real. Okay, because when I think real,
existed but not real on A theory, it existed but not real.
On A theory, what exists is the present. Now,
yes,
there are also past. There are past. The past, as we refer to it, isn't something we can access.
Right.
We can't go back.
Time travel is impossible in A theory.
It was real.
Yeah, it's no
longer
in
the sense
real.
that it's right, but it's an accurate record of what transpired. It's a complete and accurate record of what transpired on past presents.
Right.
Okay. And they have already existed. Okay. The past existed when it was the present, but it no longer is the present. All that exists is the present.
This is just A theory.
This is just is A theory. A theory doesn't say that the past is real in a sense that it is still an actual thing you can access. But this is where precision in language comes back in. A theory just says
some sort of presentism that, from what I understand, that it's.
We've had an open theist tell us before that his understanding of presentism, and he spoke as though it was the A theory or the open theist writ large, was that there was some nuance between standard A theory and presentism,
that-
and wanted to talk about it like a spotlight on a stage that's moving around and all of this. But yeah, that what you just described, the past did exist, but it doesn't anymore. The future will exist, but it doesn't yet.
now. In
A
real.
theory.
Yeah.
To borrow a phrase from my opponent in the debate, maybe that's just some mutant form of presentism. I don't know.
Could be. Could be. I would just say the name of the guy that made it up. That's not presentism. That's, you know, Smithism or Cooperism or whatever.
It's very illusory though. It had, but I was like, some of what it said kind of makes sense to me. But
well, and another issue for this is that the timeline of heaven in the scriptures runs parallel to the timeline of earth.
I agree
right?
with that.
Things that transpire in the heavenly realm are reactions to things that happen in the earthly realm at the same time. Right?
Do you think heaven is outside of the physical universe, Tim?
Physical universe, again, is Jesus being the physical incarnation, right? He's God incarnate, and he retains his resurrection body, ascending into heaven.
Yes.
Is he
visible, not
visible,
present? Not physical? Visible, not physical. Visible,
but is he physically present in the? Is he physically present?
We all agree with that.
Yes.
He's physically located. So just
I don't want to say inside the universe, outside the universe, inside the
universe.
Yeah,
these are all things that are just so
visible. Because I think it's
we're assuming
right
so much by the time we even say that stuff.
Yeah, I know.
You know?
So,
well, wait a minute. Why do you have to assume anything? I'll be like the open theists and the young Earth creationists here on this, and I'll just be like, "Why are you assuming anything? Just look at what it says. That's what it means. What it says right there." And he went up, so he went up. Big deal.
Sure. Yeah.
Hey, look here. Tim, someone wants to brag on you.
Pal.
Telling truth, experiencing lies gives $5 and says, "Thank you for bringing Tim on the channel." Hi, Tim. From one who emailed you a couple of days ago, I appreciate your approach to debate. Thank you for that.
I know of this person, and their email to me was a massive shot in the arm. So thank you. I'm glad to know what your channel name is, so now I can go find you.
Let's go one more clip from the cross-sex, and then this is going forever. So let's see what else.
I think we're at about one clip every half hour or so, which is a good rate.
And unchangeably decree the horrendous satanic debacle at the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games according to his eternal decree for his maximum glory.
Yes.
Can you explain to me how you think that might catch?
Oh, that's easy. That's easy. How many pastors in here preached a sermon the next Sunday that allowed us to illustrate the total depravity of man, his hatred of God's truth, and to encourage our people to recognize that the secular world is not neutral toward us; it is opposed to us and hates God's ways. So yes,
why is it
God
opposed?
All that stuff he determined, right?
I was going to say,
I'm sorry. Why is it opposed to us ultimately, and why does it hate God's ways ultimately?
Well, again, ultimately is not the same thing as how that brings about God's glory.
Sure.
Because in time, their expression of their hatred in time is real and it's important.
Sure.
And yes, it comes from God's decree, but it is real in and of itself, and they are accountable for that. And then God calls us to listen, to learn, to understand, to become wise, and to pass that on to the next generation and to live for his glory.
So I kind of liked his response here, and I know you hate it, but
you can probably see me just cringing.
Yeah, but one of the reasons why I want to play that clip is I actually kind of like. I mean, it's not the response that I would give, but it's kind of the best you can do if you're a Calvinist, right? But,
yes, that I can give.
But what he's essentially saying here is that God has a purpose in all of those horrible things, and it is instructive to us to study the Bible, learn who God is, and then God is using these things instrumentally as a teaching tool to shape us, and so it's in an instrumental. It's kind of got a telos to all of this to be instructive for us. That's what he's saying. So we respond to it as Christians the way the Holy Spirit wants us to glean from that the truths applied from Scripture to our context, all of that. So he's giving kind of that. I know you don't like the utilitarian response, but he is saying that the purpose in all that is to be instructive to those of us who can call out that evil.
Except given determinism, he could have just determined for us to have the right beliefs from a different angle that didn't require him to determine, but as a feature of a unilateral and sovereign decree that expresses his evil as an attribute in the world. Okay, maybe they wouldn't accept that entailment, or that they wouldn't affirm what I just said, but that's an entailment of it. He could cause people to believe and to do whatever he wants them to believe or to do, and decreeing evil means to a good end is still evil.
Well, that's where the only thing that you could because he'd have to argue against that last point. I'm always curious how they would.
I don't think they can consistently.
But he would say, yeah, but see, like I said, what we experience here matters. It really happened. They're really bad people. They really need to be judged, all of that. And we need to learn from it. And God could have decreed us with all knowledge at once that we needed, the proper mental contents of beliefs. But God wants us to grow and experience and all of that. And that's part of what he determined to happen. So he can handle most of that, except for your last sentence where it's like, yeah, but then you're making a claim. And I think the Calvinist pushback is typically, well, who are you, oh man, at this point? You know, it's like your understanding of good and evil is not on God's level of, but I mean, they could also sit there and say, but God has morally sufficient reasons for designing the world to operate this way. I mean,
I'm utterly
evil, but there's a divine double standard to where God not being accountable to anyone can use the evil for good purposes like that, some of which is to shape the elect to have growth and better thoughts.
He is accountable to his own nature. He's accountable to himself to be self-consistent. And if his nature is the source and fount and definition of goodness and truth, then he is not the person who sources and originates those things. He's not the being that sources and originates those things.
Well, I agree with you, but I'm just trying to help out the Calvinist here. Well, okay, then we have time for one more. Then let's do it.
Sure.
And eternally decreed for you to believe and incorrectly teach premillennialism before he sovereignly used.
Well, I wasn't a teacher at that point in time. But if you want to use amillennialism again, yes, he did.
Got it. So, did God sovereignly decree for you to hold incorrect views after he regenerated you and sent the Spirit to lead you into all things?
Actually, what God sovereignly decreed is that I am to grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ, which means there's a process where I am becoming more conformed to his image.
Sure. So that means how deceived you are.
So that means I can talk louder than you can, Tim. So what that means, so what that means is that there is a process in this life of me coming to understand his truth with more consistency. Sure. We are called to go that direction.
It
has nothing to do with decreeing anything.
Sure. Well, I think everything has to do with the decree in your view.
The way that you're playing things, we are not
told
told what the decree is. We don't know these things.
Sure,
we don't know the content of it.
But you agree that the decree is discernible, at least in the past tense, as you review past events. Everything that transpires was decreed.
Because all things have meaning. Exactly. Yes. Okay. God works all things
for our good. But if God sovereignly decreed that he deceive you about the contents of the future, sure. Ultimately, it's his.
You didn't ask me that question.
His decree.
You didn't ask me that.
Well, Dr. White, it's his decree that led to you holding a false belief.
That's not deception. No, it's not. That's why I answered the way that I did. I am to grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. This is in time.
So he decreed exactly how wrong you were.
God did not have to deceive me into believing something wrong. I have to learn the truth over time. That's what the Spirit does in our lives.
But God decides the contents of your gray matter.
Okay, but that's eternity. You and I.
It's not eternity. It's eternity past.
No. This is where we will never agree, because you will not allow for God to have an existence in eternity and his decree to be up there, and we exist in time. It's the result of that decree, but we are only accountable for what goes on in time.
What difference does that make? That's what I want to know. Look, I agree.
I'm actually having
White.
A lot of fun watching this.
I agree with White that God exists timelessly, but I do not see how it helps at all to say, well, God, that's because you're thinking about it. You know, God's up on this. He's outside of time. We're in time. So what does that have to do with the problem we're pointing out with the decree?
None whatsoever. He decreed that in time he would hold false beliefs. Again, this is if he believes he's right now. He believes he would have to affirm that God decreed that from this point in time to this point in time, after being a spirit-filled, regenerated, good Calvinist believer, that he was unilaterally decreed to believe this degree of falsehood for this many years, probably a decade, maybe longer, then to shift into this sort of wishy-washy space where he's like, I don't know, maybe Amil sounds simpler and it makes more, and he kind of lands there, and he decreed for him to be partially correct but still wrong if he's right now, and I don't grant that he's right now, but on his view, this is what God did. He determined and decreed the contents of his gray matter and the degree of falseness of his beliefs from beginning to end through to the present moment, and it's proven. He's proven willing to deceive. I use the word deceive, and I use it intentionally. He did not like it, but I think it stands to deceive Dr. White about the contents of the future in premillennialism, amillennialism, post-mill frame. The contents of the future are very different on all of those three different interpretive schematics. Okay, so if he was wrong before here and here, about the contents of the future. I just wanted to surface the possibility that maybe, on his view, God also determined for him to be wrong about the shape of the future that he's is talking about in the contents of
make
this
the
debate.
connection so that my same claim about Dr. White can't be applied here.
Which claim?
In the word, well, when he asked you a loaded question, loaded term, deceived, if determined to be wrong for a purpose to have him grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord and come to have this process of digging deeper in theology being good for shaping his Christ likeness or whatever. If we grant him all that, determined to be wrong so that he would change. How does determine him to be wrong mean intentionally and with malice deceiving him to believe false things? Instead
with malice is maybe the thing you would add, right? So deceive is intending to cause someone to believe something false for a malicious reason, okay, or for something. I can see where you might say, okay, it's the malicious factor that really does take that over the edge. But let's just say, okay, I'm having a conversation with ChatGPT, and I feed it a bunch of false information, insisting that it's true. Okay, and I submit that all as the knowledge set that ChatGPT now possesses for the purposes of my conversation with ChatGPT. It's not a person. Okay, let's just get that out of the way. It's not a person. It's not a personal agent or whatever. But I am intentionally submitting false information for ChatGPT to hold and to consider as true. And you might say that that's not deceptive. It's not dishonest because it's not a person. But if I had the ability to do that to a person's gray matter, and I had the ability to decide all of the false beliefs that a person holds, and I would say, I have a reason for this person to believe this false thing. Okay, you might not call that deception, whatever. If God is determining all of the falsehoods present in your gray matter, then he's proven willing to make you wrong-headed about something, to make you not know something on that view if he determined it, and especially if he determined it from eternity past.
Yeah, I mean, kind of where Tim Stratton gets into the deity of deception kind of thing. I kind of, because I think that the overall point is that why is God wanting his children to believe wrong things, even if I guess that's where you get into a graded scale. Isn't it better that they just believe true things, So
God wanted James White to be wrong and believe wrong, and he wanted to ensure that James White had false beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, and
on his view,
I think without
on James White's view, not
without using the word deception. I mean, why is it? I mean, because it seems like, why does God need to deterministically cause us to, if he's determining all the contents of our gray matter to help us to, if he's aiming the cannon, so to speak, to bad eschatology, why need that? Because if what he says is God didn't deceive me, because that's where he objected. But why does God need to?
I think his response would probably be something like, we don't need to know what the morally permissible reason is in order for us to posit that there is one, right? And that's
fair, but that's
frustrated. That's a punt to mystery. Okay,
yeah,
but
it's fair, but it doesn't answer the question of just look at the biblical data. Going back to the verses that we were haggling over earlier, if it's God's intent that we know right things, and he gives us all the necessary things in the vineyard for it to make good grapes, why is God actively determining or decreeing in eternity past that we don't come out as grapes? Why are we sour on our eschatology? Why is there some other thing independent of God's expressed will? Why do we need this other thing? Because it seems like if God's going to give us scripture, he's going to give us teachings, he's going to give us all of this stuff and the rational faculties to uncover this, why is he going to decree opposite what he wants us to come to?
Look, I'm a simple man. I sit and I read the Proverbs, and I read about Lady Wisdom and I read about Lady Folly. And Lady Wisdom is in the streets calling out to anybody who's simple, who wants wisdom, who wants to know more about God and his ways. She's calling out from the streets. She's prepared a meal and she's inviting people into her home. She's not secret. She's not hidden. She's not esoteric. She's not something that you would expect only to receive by something like a divine gnosis. She's trying to be heard. She wants to be heard. And wayward people ignore her. And they go and follow the path of Lady Folly. They go and follow the path of the wicked man. And they do that instead of listening. Right. And again, if I'm in this position and I'm reading that, conspicuous by its absence is any posit is the position that God makes people believe false things.
Yeah,
it's baldly on its
or
face
even
attributed to God's enemies.
Yeah,
And he's not controlling them.
Yeah, because like I said, I think White is giving the best answer he can come up with, which is
Right.
it has a utility. It's the same answer, but go back to what Braxton said. It doesn't address the issue, no matter how much we don't see eye to eye on the up there versus down here thing, the transcendent versus immanent. Okay, but there's no. He never explains how that's resolved because God has this thing up here and then interacts with us and decreed for all of these things for me to believe wrong things about Calvinism or whatever. What does that have to do with anything?
Yeah.
So
It
it
doesn't really
doesn't
answer the
resolve the
question.
tension. Now, because I can't see even without deception, why does God want us to believe wrong? Is there no other way for us to grow? Because I mean, certainly, if once you get your eschatology sorted out in your mind, you're still growing on other things. You have figure out the mess with ecclesiology, figure out the mess with protology.
Oh, that's my jam.
Yeah. So it's like I get there's a beauty in learning, right? So I get that God can not give us all of the information, but White's going a step further in saying in eternity past, God gave us false information for a while. And that's totally different than letting a free agent go through the process of learning. I don't see why his step is gratuitous for me.
Here's the most hilarious part about this, I think. So if you just flatly exclude, I don't, okay, but for the purposes of this conversation, if you exclude all like Eastern Orthodox, Coptic Orthodox, any of the kind of like Orthodox churches and Catholics, again, I wouldn't do that. I think, okay, this is a whole conversation, but if you just exclude those people from the record and say only among Protestants, people that hold Dr. White's view historically of being some flavor, not even the most extreme version, which is his view, but just like some flavor of what you would call Calvinism. That's 7% of all Protestants in history. Okay. And if you include
Catholic.
the Orthodox and the Catholic back in, it's 2.7% of all people who have claimed the name of Christ down through history.
Some Catholics are kind of Calvinistic.
Of course. And there's Augustinianism and there's all this stuff. I'm simply saying just on the basis of Calvinism.
Yeah.
Okay. 7% or 2.7%.
Right.
So in his view, God unilaterally decreed that somewhere between 93-ish and 97-ish% of his own children would be deceived or wrong-headed or have wrong beliefs about the nature of God's relationship to the world in this really important way. And that's just a feature of God's decree. I was trying really hard during the debate to avoid the Leighton Flowers gambit of just tacking on the clause by God's unilateral and sovereign decree at the end of every sentence he ever spoke in the middle of the debate.
Well,
I thought it a bunch of times.
You have much more control in the debate than Flowers has on Twitter, that's for sure. But yeah, the two problems I have is one, his idea is gratuitous because free creatures, it better explains that than God intentionally making 97% or whatever, intentionally making them wrong for whatever purpose. So the first thing is his view is gratuitous on that point of having wrong beliefs for his children. When it's easier to explain, we come to the wrong conclusions all on our own. But the second problem I had with what Dr. White's answer here is this idea that if God doesn't decree it up here versus down here, if God doesn't deterministically cause it or decree it or whatever language you want to use, that it can't have purpose. That's not been proven. That's a claim. That's an assertion that he's made that is never proven, that just because he didn't decree it or determine it means it has no purpose. And we've talked about this. I I'm fine with everything having a purpose that I can't witness, but I'm also fine, as I said in the previous week, that not everything actually has a purpose, that butterfly effects to ways we can't say. I'm fine both ways.
Or if it has a purpose, it's not God's purpose necessarily. God can bring good out of all kinds of things that were purposed for evil.
Right. So how does it follow that it has no purpose if God doesn't decree it?
Because he doesn't believe there is any purpose outside of God's purposes. He believes that God purposed everything. He has to believe that in order to remain consistent with his view.
Yeah, but it's still a non sequitur to say, I believe that God decreed all these horrible things because it has a purpose. And I'm like, well, I believe that everything or some things or very few things, I'm not going to say nothing has a purpose, but I'm open to everything or not, just all the way down to just a few things God tells us about, whatever, and anything in between. Everything can be perfect. It doesn't follow that he decreed them in the Calvinistic sense. That's a non sequitur to me, that if God didn't decree, then nothing has purpose. That
hey guys,
makes no sense.
Hey guys, I'm still here, and I've got a super chat for Tim, and I was wondering if after that we might wrap things up.
Sure.
That sound good to you, Tim?
Yeah.
Since
Sounds
Pritchett
like a plan.
runs away every time I start talking, I'll make that decision. So, okay, Roy Stutzer.
Okay, everyone watch me eat chicken. I'll just do it on camera.
I thought he was
So
grabbing a
Roy
whiskey bottle,
Stutzer
but that's
says,
easier.
"Hey Tim, I'm gonna beat this dead horse, but White frames the debate in time. I can see why you didn't address this, but he hangs himself on this. I think he means I wish you
he
did
means
address
you
it. Now
addressed
we
it.
kind of talked about that already a little bit. I don't see how that distinction would help really in the points that he was employing it about that he wants things or he decrees and wants things that he doesn't want, But anyway, yeah.
Look, candidly, when it comes to this, I have views of time that when I say them, because we've been so trained to think about time as like a separate entity, again, like we're borrowing B theory language, like it being a fourth dimension where B theory posits the growing block or something like that, where it's like it's almost using spatial language to describe time. People talking about God's omnipresence being everywhere and every when and all these things. When I hear those things, all of this is being smuggled in, and these thoughts they're actually foreign to the way that we experience reality. Now, that doesn't mean that it's foreign to reality as it is, but I think it's also foreign to the way that reality is described on the pages of Scripture. I don't think, when I think of time, and Roy, your material is great. If you would be willing, I would invite you to send me an email to tim@theoverlap.life with everything regarding time that you would like to lay on my plate for me to read, and I'll do a video, and maybe if it makes sense, we can even have you on to talk about it. Because I agree, this whole time thing, it's not a separate thing. Time is a property of things. It's just sequence, right? It's just matter in motion, or even not matter. Doesn't even have to be matter, right? Because if we think God's a spirit and he's not material, whatever, there's a whole thing there. I think it's just sequence. And it's temporal locations are separate from, it's just a feature of reality. It's not a thing that's created that's separate, that then has experiences and relationships with reality. It's a feature of things that are real. In the same way that things have space, they take up space, they have time, and they take up time.
It's a
I think of time as the last thing I'll think. The last thing I'll say, just to talk about what Roy has surfaced in past posts. Again, I think of eternity past as things that have temporal relations and temporal locations to one another. Okay. And then when we talk about time, most of the time, what we're discussing is talking about the measurement of time. Measuring that time is different.
Measuring
from
what?
The thing that the distance between things in their temporal location to one another. Right.
But you're measuring, what is that measurement based upon?
My receiving hairline.
When I
look
at this,
I don't mean what events are happening that you measure it.
Right.
You said we come up with this seconds, minutes, hours. These are measurements we create as a construct, and I agree. We decide on those durations.
Yeah.
But we're measuring what? Durations of what?
It's literally just location between things, right? It's location between things in a timeline. So when I say the critique I'm trying to levy, and the critique I'm trying to bring up right now, is that when people talk about time, they think of it as having begun at the creation. Okay.
Yes.
And it did not, meaning like ontologically, its existence begins at the creative event. And it did not
The beginning
exist
of the measurement,
outside.
which is what you consider time to
Right.
be.
My statement is that the creative event is a demarcation line after which we start to measure that time relative to the creative event. But that doesn't
Measure
mean that there
what?
wasn't time before.
Measure time?
The existence of something that existed before, right?
Well,
We
wait a
measure the
minute.
passing of time.
I think you've got a grounding problem for time. Because you're talking about measuring something, but you can't tell me what that something is. Like, you want to say time as a stand-in for a duration, but that
Change.
still sounds like you're pointing to something real.
It's sequence. It's
Yeah, but I
sequence.
could take a piece of paper and I could put 3 dots on it and draw lines between them and say, look, there's a sequence, 1 dot, 2 dots, 3 dots, but there's no time taking place. It's static
But
on
that's
the
fallacious
page.
because there's not a reason to think of that as a sequence in time, right? There's no reason.
Well,
to think of
but
that as a sequence in
I'm
time.
trying. Yeah, that's exactly the point, though. You're just saying time is just a sequence, and I'm saying and then you just corrected me by saying no, because that's not a sequence in time. And I'm like, okay, then what is that? What is a woman question? What is time?
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, I would say maybe sequence and change, where there is a ordered relationship. Okay, like we might need to cash this out a little differently. Part of my worldview comes from Genesis 1, where God creates the heavenly host. Okay, and he calls it the sun, moon, and stars. Right, and there's a whole bunch of stuff happening there too. Heavenly host is the armies. The worldview of the ancient Hebrews was that those things were the things up in the sky that are we know as flaming gas balls are angelic beings, right? And there's this whole thing. But what purpose he gives them, what he tells them to do, is that they are for the keeping or the governing of times and seasons.
Yeah, this
right?
is like a Walter, what's his name? John Walton type reading of Genesis 1. Sort of, he's declaring the function of all what they're for, but they already existed. But there was something okay. So this is something that I was wondering last week, and I know I just said we need to wind it up, but now I'm interested. So last week we talked about this, and I think it came up. I can't remember what you said. What about the fact that, or what about the scientific evidence of special relativity and the different measure, like time relative to your speed and all those kind of things, like we saw in what was the name of the movie that was brought up with Matthew McConaughey? Interstellar. Where the people go down to this planet, and because of its size and gravitation and all that sort of thing, they're down there for like 3 minutes, but when they get back up, the guy's been up there for 3 years in the ship. And this relativity of time, how does this make sense of that?
So most of that is pseudoscience. Most of that, like the way that gets
deny
cashed out
that
and
is
talked
what is
about
the way
is,
around
I don't want to say I'm going to just deny that. I deny those implications of it as evidenced in fictional movies and TV shows and TV series positing what it would look like to travel through space. There's a lot of that stuff that's pseudoscience. That is,
well, I mean, those films and stuff are based largely on like Einstein's special relativity, I think, right?
Based on certain extrapolations, okay, extrapolations that aren't really even provable. Again, and I would also say that those are things that are positing our experience of time as being made up of matter. This is a whole big problem, nuanced conversation. Time is probably the most imprecise thing we talk about. We have the hardest time explaining. Dang it, I even used the word time there. We have the hardest experience describing time in a way that doesn't collapse into nonsense. But I will just say that a lot of those descriptions are based on real science in the same way that like a movie is based on a true story.
Would you say if it were demonstrated, if science demonstrated to your satisfaction that time is relative in that way, would you then say time is more than a sequence?
I don't have any idea what that would do for the non-existence of time pre-creation. I don't know how that would change that at all, because I don't think that's not the nature of my critique. The nature of my critique is that I think time existed in what we call eternity past, right? Pre-creation, time existed, but that what began is the measurement of that time relative to the creation. So I don't know if that were proven true, that would change how I understand the way we experience time, but I don't think that would change my ontology of time.
Well, I'd love to talk to you sometime in the future. We won't do it now because we need to wrap up.
Sometime.
But at some point, I'd like to talk to you about infinites and how what kind of past infinite that means and how
Actual infinites, and
how we cross that. I suspect maybe you'd say it's not an actual infinite, that it's because it's not divided and all that sort of thing. But I think that creates a real problem, but we could talk about that sometime and see where it goes.
Sure.
Pritchett, Tim, you guys have anything you want to say before we wrap up?
This has been a pleasure. 3 weeks in a row. I think I agree with some of the commenters saying that this was actually more interesting than the debate. And I do hope that in the future, though, we can have a couple of open theists. Hopefully, you, Tim, versus a open theist that has a different view than the dynamic omniscient, so that we can see some of those hashed out, because I'd be very interested in that. So the challenge is open to anyone who wants to debate Tim on our channel, and we'll host and moderate and promote and all of that. So
yeah, there's some heavyweights that would really bring a lot of really good points.
Yeah, now they want to take down the guy who took down Dr. White. So target on your back. And I think, like I said, I'm unsettled on the whole time thing now. Have been for a little while. But then Inspiring Philosophy unsettled me for the first time since I read Berkeley on idealism. So I'm just still sifting through those things. So lots of things that are fun.
If anybody else wants to go a little bit deeper on this, and I'm still chewing on it, I would highly recommend the book The Death of the Timeless God by Ryan Mullins. Outstanding, extraordinarily well argued book. He's a Molinist, so he's not even on my side.
No, he's a modified classical theist, I think he calls himself.
Something of that nature. Yeah, it's not to say that I agree with him on everything, but his thoughts about time are very good.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I've enjoyed this. Tim, thank you for these 3 weeks, and we'll certainly have you back anytime you want to come back. And thank you for all the super chats and all the interaction. And with that, we'll
video
tomorrow. What, Pritchett?
We have a debate to promote. Another debate to promote.
Oh,
from Trinity Radio Fake Animation Studios.
Yeah, next week on Wednesday, or maybe it's Tuesday, I'll be dropping an animated. There's a debate out there. Don't go listen to it. Listen to our version. There's a debate from 1968 between Walter Martin, who wrote the book The Kingdom of the Cults and headed the Christian Research Institute, and between him and Madeleine Murray O'Hair. There's a Netflix special about her called The Most Hated Woman in America, which she referred to herself. And actually, it's pretty good documentary. It's not just like atheist propaganda material. And she was murdered actually in 1995. She and her youngest son, who was a grown man, but her youngest son and her granddaughter, by someone from her own organization. And and her son, her oldest son, she's most famous for getting the prayer out of the public schools. And that happened when she had her oldest son in public schools. He was her, strongest supporter, right-hand man, all the way up into forming the American Atheist Organization. But then he later became a Christian and is a Baptist minister, I think, to this day. So super interesting. But the debate was on NBC Radio in New York City. I used AI to create the characters, but the animations, if you want to call them that, were all done by hand and all that thing. It took forever, and probably not enough people are going to watch it for it to warrant all that time.
But hey, let's prove him wrong.
Give it a chance, because it is. I am so proud of Braxton. He did such a wonderful job on that. I'm already throwing out other things that he needs to animate that are out there. Our debate back when I was fat. I'd like for him to animate that. I'd like to animate the Greg Bonson debate. So it's really it's not
He's
just
a man of many talents.
Yeah.
There's already a trailer for it on the channel. So just go to the videos tab. And then also tomorrow I'm going to drop not a debate, but a discussion about our disagreements that I had with an atheist. And so you'll want to be here for that tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, and Monday night for the Biblical Rogues Gallery, Leighton Flowers. The reason why the kerfluffle and the debate between Barber and White over Romans 8:28, we're at that part in Romans now. We're going to be 26 through 31, but we're going to talk about that, the textual variant, the alternative translations of Romans 8:28, and all of that. I think, Tim, you're going to show up for that, right?
I'm going to do my best.
Do your best Monday night. But Nick's got a lot to say about it because I think Nick already did a video where he has that already on video defending that position, and we're going to throw some things at him. So there's a lot to talk about on Romans 8:28. So Monday night at 6:30, be here for the Biblical Rogues Gallery. We'll be going through that. So,
And with that, go ahead, Tim.
No, just going to say, appreciate you guys again having me on. Not sure how frequently you'd like to make this a thing, but seems like the other streams have done pretty well. That
We
might
love
be
it.
more
Yeah,
because of
you-
Dr. White than me, but
No, it's fun because you argue with us, but don't get mad at us, and we like that. So,
and go subscribe to the Overlap Life with Tim Barber. Go subscribe if you haven't. Good
with
stuff.
that, we'll see you next time. And I'm really going to turn off the stream now. We'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.